Tears in the council chamber. Anakin's impossible choice. Our story opens inside the Jedi council chambers on Coruscant. Night has fallen over the endless cityscape, and rain is streaking down the tall windows in silver lines that blur the lights of a restless galaxy. The roar of traffic and thunder is muffled here, trapped beyond transparent steel, leaving only the hollow echo of an almost empty room. Almost. Anakin Skywalker stands alone at the window. His reflection stares back at him, eyes red and wet, jaw clenched so tightly it trembles. He presses a hand to the glass, as if he can reach across the city to where the storm truly rages. Because in the Chancellor's office, Mace Windu and Darth Sidious are locked in combat, blades crashing, lightning screaming, light and dark colliding in the highest office of the Republic. In this moment, Anakin feels every strike. Through the Force, he senses glass shattering, senses the Chancellor's fear, senses Mace driving the Sith Lord back toward the ledge. It should have been simple. A Jedi Master confronting a hidden monster. But to Anakin, nothing is simple anymore. Padmé's face hangs in his mind like a vision he cannot escape. Her hand on her stomach, her voice whispering of the child they are about to bring into a war-torn galaxy. Her dying in his arms in dreams he cannot stop. Every breath he takes feels chained to her life, to the terror that the Chosen One will fail the one person he cannot bear to lose. Around that terror coils another weight, years of war pressing down on his shoulders, legions of clones marching and dying under his command, worlds burning while the Jedi debate in circles. The Council's mistrust echoes in his mind, denied the rank of master, ordered to spy on the man who has been his mentor and friend. And beneath it all, like a whisper in the dark, the promise of the Sith, the tragedy of Darth Plagueis, the secret of stopping death itself. All he had to do was reach out his hand, seize that power, and no one he loved would ever be taken from him again. The fate of the Republic, of the Jedi, of the galaxy is collapsing into a single point inside his chest. If Mace Windu falls, the last barrier between a Sith Lord and absolute control disappears. If Palpatine dies, the one being who claims to know how to save Padmé is gone forever. Save the Chancellor, or save the Jedi. One choice, and the future will never be the same. Anakin's fingers close around his lightsaber hilt. In canon, this is the instant he storms from the room, racing toward a destiny forged in fire and betrayal. But tonight, he does not move. His knuckles whiten. His breath shakes. A different path flickers at the edge of his thoughts. Fragile, impossible, and yet suddenly real. He can see another future, one where the Chosen One does not become the Sith's weapon, where he does not trade the Jedi for chains. For a heartbeat, he made a choice in his mind that his body has not yet followed. Anakin takes a step toward the door. Time seems to slow. Rain frozen on the glass. Lightning frozen over the Senate dome. The galaxy holds its breath with him. And right here, in this suspended second, the story fractures. Because this time, what happens if Anakin Skywalker does not become Darth Vader? To answer, the timeline itself must be rewound. Rewinding to the ledge, rebuilding the canon scene. The timeline snaps backward. The frozen lightning over the Senate dome dissolves into a different storm, one already raging above the Chancellor's office on Coruscant. Glass walls tremble. Thunder rolls between the towers as blue streaks of lightning crawl across the sky, throwing jagged reflections over polished floors and crimson carpets. Inside, blades are already crossed. Mace Windu's amethyst lightsaber hammers against a burning red line in Palpatine's hands. Each impact is a sharp, metallic scream, echoing off statues of former chancellors that now watch a hidden Sith reveal himself. In this moment, the office is no longer a seat of government. It is a dueling chamber at the heart of the galaxy's storm. Palpatine moves first like a coiled predator unleashed. Feral speed, teeth bared, his red blade a blur as he cuts down Aegon Kola, Saezi Teen, Kit Fisto in heartbeats. Then Varpad answers. Mace's form is controlled fury. Every step a calculated risk that draws the Sith Lord's darkness into his own unbreakable focus. The fate of the Jedi, of the Republic, of the galaxy rides on each precise rotation of that purple blade. They crash through the office, Palpatine driving forward with raw power, Mace yielding, redirecting, striking back. A flurry of blows sends their blades scything toward the glass wall. One mistimed parry, one perfectly angled riposte, and the transparasteel explodes outward. Shards spin into the night as wind and rain roar into the chamber, carried on the sound of distant speeders and closer thunder. They spill onto the narrow ledge. Rain slicks the permacrete beneath their boots. The drop beneath them a bottomless canyon of traffic lanes and neon, purple against red, light against dark. Each swing threatens not only a fall, but a future where one Sith Lord rules unopposed. Lightning from the storm flashes around them, mirroring the crackling energy locked between their blades. Step by step, Mace drives Palpatine back inside. The Chancellor's refined mask is slipping now. His features twist, eyes burning yellow as the true Sith Lord surfaces. Statues topple. Desks are carved apart. The office transforms into a battlefield. Every overturned chair another piece of evidence that the Republic's guardian was always its executioner. Then, the opening. A perfectly timed disarm, Varpad snapping shut. Mace hooks Palpatine's blade, twists, and the red saber spins away into the darkness beyond the shattered window. Palpatine drops to the floor, right where he wanted him, or so he believes. Blue lightning erupts from his fingers. It floods the room, clawing at Mace's blade as the Jedi Master braces. The reflected energy lashes back into Palpatine's own face, scarring and aging him in seconds, twisting his features into the monstrous visage that will haunt Anakin's nightmares. The Sith Lord's screams turn to rasping pleas for mercy, his voice cracking, his power suddenly caged behind a trembling facade of weakness. All he had to do now was stall. Mace stands over him, saber raised, lightning still crackling between them. Every heartbeat tracks perfectly with Revenge of the Sith. The same storm, the same ledge, the same trap being sprung for the chosen one. And then, footsteps in the hall. The doors hiss open. Anakin Skywalker arrives, and this time he is about to make a different choice. The storm, outside, the war inside, Anakin's splintering mind. Anakin does not speak at first. His breath catches in his throat as the doors hiss shut behind him, sealing him inside the storm. Then he runs, boots hammering against polished marble, cloak snapping in the wind that howls through shattered transparasteel. Thunder rolls over Coruscant like distant artillery, each boom sinking with the pounding in his chest as Palpatine's promise claws at his mind. There is a power, a Sith power, to save Padme from death. Rain has blown in sideways through the broken windows. It slicks the floor, soaks his hair, runs cold beneath his armor as he sprints toward the inner office. Every footstep echoes with other words, older wounds. The council chamber. The circle of high-backed chairs. Mace's voice, flat and unyielding. denying him the rank of master, even as they used him as a spy. The sting of that humiliation burns hotter than the lightning outside. In this moment, the storm outside is nothing compared to the one inside his skull. Obi-Wan is on Utapau, far away, chasing Grievous, leaving Anakin alone in the capital with a chancellor who understands him and a council that does not. Ahsoka's back is turned again in his memory, walking away from the Jedi Temple after they doubted her, after they doubted him. The doors closed behind her once. They feel like they are closing on him now. All he had to do, the Chancellor said, was embrace a greater power. The Jedi are narrow. The Jedi are afraid. They want control. They want to overthrow the Senate. That narrative presses in on one side of his thoughts, seductive and simple. On the other, the Council's warnings grind against it like grinding gears. Palpatine has stayed in office too long. Palpatine is undermining democracy. Palpatine is dangerous. Two stories about the same man, and Anakin is the fulcrum between them. Lightning flashes through the broken panes, painting the hallway in stuttering white. For a heartbeat, the reflections on the wet floor look like blaster fire across a battlefield, clones and droids frozen in a phantom war. The Force roils ahead of him, a violent knot of purple and red. He can feel Mace Windu's focus, a blade honed by decades of war. He can feel the Chancellor's presence too, that familiar warmth curdling into something colder, darker, right where he wanted him. The fate of the Republic, of the Jedi, of the galaxy, it all presses down on his shoulders as he runs. The Chosen One, that old prophecy, whispers from the depths of the temple, from Yoda's quiet gazes and Qui-Gon's long-ago faith. He was meant to bring balance to the Force. But what does balance look like when the only thing that feels clear is Padmé's face, pale and gasping in a vision he cannot escape? He reaches the final corridor. The thunder is louder here, the wind a constant howl. The air tastes of ozone and scorched metal. Every sense is overloaded. The flicker of emergency lights, the sting of rain in his eyes, the metallic tang of fear. His, Mace's, the Chancellor's, bleeding together in the Force. His hand twitches toward his lightsaber hilt. He hesitates. He made a choice to come, but not yet what to do. Another crash of lightning. Another scream in the Force. Anakin slams his palm against the final door control. The panels part. He bursts into the office threshold, breathless, cloak dripping, eyes wide. Mace Windu stands over the shattered window, violet blade raised for the final strike. Sidious lies below him, face twisted, body cowering, fingers still crackling with fading lightning. For a single suspended heartbeat, everything hangs between those two figures, and the Jedi between them, waiting for which way Anakin Skywalker will fall. Two voices, one blade, the final pull on Anakin's soul. Anakin steps forward into the wreckage of the office, rain hissing through the shattered window as it hits stray sparks of molten glass. His heart is pounding so loudly it drowns out the city beyond, because in this moment, the fate of the Republic, of the Jedi, of the entire galaxy, hangs on what happens between three men in this single room. Sidious feels it. He drags himself up on one elbow, eyes burning yellow beneath a mask of fear. "I am the Senate," he rasps, spitting each word like venom. It is the Jedi who are plotting against the Republic. A coup against democracy itself. The last arcs of his own lightning still crawl over the durasteel, the air thick with the sharp, metallic stink of it. Mace does not move his blade. The violet edge hangs inches from Palpatine's throat, close enough that the Emperor-to-be can feel the heat. The oppression of the Sith will never return, Windu answers, voice low, unshakable. He's too dangerous to be left alive. His knuckles whiten around the hilt as he glances just once toward Anakin, wordlessly demanding that the Chosen One remember his duty. Sidious seizes that tiny fracture. Master Windu intends to murder the Chancellor, he gasps, forcing terror into every syllable. The courts are mine, yes, but only so I can ensure stability. The Jedi would tear that down. They fear my power. Then his gaze snaps to Anakin, and the mask of statesman falls away, revealing the Sith beneath. Only through me can you save her. Only a Sith has the knowledge to cheat death. Padme will die without what I know. The words hit harder than any bolt of lightning. Anakin's breath catches, Padme's face flashing before him, hand on her stomach, laughing softly on the balcony, then twisting in agony in his visions. All he had to do, Sidious had promised, was embrace that power. The promise coils around his fear of loss like a serpent. Mace cuts across it like a blade. Anakin, he says, never taking his eyes off the Sith. He controls the Senate and the courts. A trial would be a joke. If he lives, the Republic dies. This is justice. This is the only way to protect everyone. Duty, law, the Jedi Code. Windu throws all of it at the same heart Sidious is trying to claim. The room shrinks around Anakin, the whine of Mace's saber held taut at Sidious's throat, the faint crackle of residual lightning still dancing along the walls, the roar of distant speeders muffled, as if the galaxy itself is holding its breath. His own heartbeat becomes the loudest sound in the world. Two voices, one blade, one promising love saved through forbidden power, one demanding sacrifice in the name of justice. Each paints the other as traitor, each reaching for the same soul. Anakin's hand hovers over his lightsaber. Not yet drawn, not yet committed. Fingers tremble above the hilt, caught between attachment and obligation, between Padme's life and the Republic's. In that suspended second, the Chosen One stands on the narrowest edge of destiny. And as the storm rages outside, everything inside him fractures into visions that will decide which way he falls. Visions of what could be, Padme, Ahsoka, and the cost of power. The storm outside the Chancellor's tower roars, but inside, everything goes silent. Anakin's fingers hover over his lightsaber, and the Force surges through him like a breaking wave. Time stretches. Sound falls away. In this moment, the Chosen One is dragged inward. A flash, Padme on Naboo, sunlight on the lake, her laughter echoing off the water as she runs through the grass, one hand resting over the slightest curve of her stomach, hopeful, unafraid. Then the image tears like paper. The medbay vision slams in, harsh white lights. Padme gasping for breath, his own hands useless as she fades. Her eyes plead with him, but not for life, for him to let go. Another jolt. Ahsoka in the Jedi Temple hangar, back turned, Montrals framed against the Coruscant skyline. His arm is outstretched, fingers shaking. All he had to do was call her back, make her stay, force an answer. But she walks away, smaller with every step, swallowed by the city below. The Council's judgment, the Senate's politics, the Order's fear of scandal, it all presses in until he feels the same emptiness he felt that day. The Jedi's rigidity has already stolen a sister from him. Obi-Wan's face cuts through the darkness. Calm, tired, proud. You are the Chosen One. His voice echoes, not as accusation, but as faith. a hand on Anakin's shoulder in the council chamber, a quiet smile on the gunship before another mission. Trust given freely. Then the hanger on the invisible hand, Dooku on his knees. The Count's lightsabers crossed at his throat, Anakin's blade humming with lethal promise. Palpatine's voice, oily and insistent. Do it. The memory slows, frame by frame. His own face twisted with anger. The snap hiss of the killing blow, and afterward, the hollow, sick weight in his chest. He had killed a helpless prisoner because the Sith Lord in front of him said it was necessary. Blue lightning erupts across his vision. Dooku's hands raised, crackling power lashing out, searing Obi-Wan, burning through Anakin's defenses. Pain. Then the scene shifts without warning. Sidious now, his face contorted, lightning pouring from his fingers into Mace Windu, into the shattered window, into the city beyond. The sound is the same. The smell is the same. The Force itself recoils. The images stack, one on top of another. Dooku's lightning, Sidious's lightning. The scream of clones dying on far-off worlds. The silent fall of every Jedi he has ever known teetering on the edge of extinction. The Sith are always the same. Power as agony. Power as chains. Then the pattern interrupts. Padme again, but different. Not dying. Standing in the Senate, pregnant, voice steady as she argues for peace, for reform, for a republic that serves more than itself. Behind her in the vision, unseen by the crowd, Jedi ignite their blades not in conquest, but in defense of the innocent. That is what the Order was meant to be. Understanding hits like a starship impact. The Sith promise to save what is loved, then twist that love into a leash. Love as fear, love as possession. The Jedi, at their best, use power to shield others from that fate, even when it costs them everything. Love as a sacrifice. In this moment, Anakin finally sees the line. To save Padme does not mean to control her destiny, or the Senate, or the galaxy. It means ensuring that no one like Sidious ever holds her life in their hands. He made a choice once in that hangar, and it filled him with shame. Now the Force shows him what that shame can become if he lets fear rule him again. His fingers close around the hilt. The storm outside surges back into sound. Mace strains against the lightning. Sidious thinks he has Anakin right where he wanted him. But as Anakin's blade finally ignites, it is not turned against the Jedi. It swings toward the true source of the galaxy's suffering. The blade falls differently. Anakin's new choice. The blue blade snaps to life with a crackling hiss, bathing the shattered office in cold light, as rain whips through the broken window and steam rises from Sidious's burning fingertips. For a single heartbeat, both masters believe they have him. Mace feels the surge of a second Jedi at his side and thinks the Chosen One has finally trusted the Order. Sidious, squinting through his own reflected lightning, senses Anakin's fear and is certain he has Anakin right where he wanted him. Everything slows. The scream of the storm fades to a distant roar. Mace's eyes widen, sweat and rain streaking down his face as he holds his blade like a wall against the torrent of power. Sidious's lips curl into a trembling, triumphant smile. Teeth bared, the word unlimited still hanging in the air like a curse. And Anakin steps forward, boots splashing in the water on the floor, blade raised. In this moment, the fate of the Republic, of the Jedi, of the galaxy, it all hangs on the angle of his next strike. All he had to do was choose. Strike down the man who calls himself a Sith, or betray the Jedi Master who has never trusted him. The council chamber, Padme's worried eyes, visions of her dying in childbirth, the Chancellor's promises of power over death. They all flash through his mind in the space between two heartbeats. He made a choice. Anakin pivots, but instead of cutting through Mace's back, as in canon, he whirls past the Corran Master in a tight, controlled spin, cloak snapping in the wind. His saber comes down in a precise, surgical arc, guided by years of war and a lifetime of instinct. The blue blade cleaves through crackling violet lightning, then through flesh and bone. Both of Sidious's wrists fall smoking to the floor. The lightning dies in an instant, the smell of charred robes and burned skin filling the office. Sidious's triumphant smile shatters into raw animal horror as the connection to his gathered power spasms and snaps. The storm outside seems to falter with him. The Dark Lord screams. It is not the theatrical cackle of a politician-turned-monster, but a broken, ragged howl as the force around him convulses. Invisible currents twist, lashing out in wild, unfocused waves that rattle the transparasteel frames and send shards skittering across the floor. Anakin does not hesitate. Drawing on the same raw strength that once tore through entire droid battalions, he thrusts out his free hand. The force slams into Sidious like a hammer. The Sith's body lifts from the ground, robes snapping, and hurtles across the office to crash into the far wall with bone-jarring impact. Plaster cracks, fixtures buckle. Sidious crumples to the floor, unconscious, a mutilated husk where the most feared Sith Lord in 1,000 years had stood seconds before. Silence crashes down. The only sounds are the hiss of Anakin's saber, the patter of rain, and the distant wail of Coruscant traffic far below. Mace lowers his blade a fraction, chest heaving, eyes locked on Anakin in disbelieving shock. This was not the Jedi way. This was not the fall he had feared. Anakin is shaking. His knuckles are white around the hilt, the blue glow painting his scarred face as he stares at the unconscious Chancellor of the Republic and the exposed Dark Lord of the Sith. The weight of what he has done settles on his shoulders like a physical thing. He has saved Mace Windu. He has maimed the Supreme Chancellor. He has just revealed, with one impossible act, that every warning about the Sith in their midst was true. And as alarms begin to flicker red along the walls, as clone shock troopers rush toward the office on orders that have not yet been given, Anakin realizes this was only the first choice. The next one might decide whether the Jedi survive the night at all. Jedi justice or Jedi coup. The argument over Sidious's life. For a heartbeat, no one moves. The alarms scream, red light strobes across shattered transparasteel, and the fate of the Republic hangs between three motionless figures on the Chancellor's office floor. Sidious lies disarmed and burned, fingers still twitching from his own reflected lightning. Mace Windu drags in a breath, centers himself, and in this moment, his purpose hardens. He steps forward. No hesitation now. His amethyst blade rises for the final strike as he tells Anakin that the oppression of the Sith will never return, that this monster is too dangerous to be left alive. Even unarmed, Sidious still controls the courts, the Senate, the clones. His power is not in his hands, Mace says. It is in the minds he has already poisoned across the galaxy. But Anakin moves. Faster than thought, his blue blade snaps back to life and he steps between Mace and the fallen Sith. Stance low and defensive. Sparks from the ruined window drift past his eyes as he tells the Jedi Master that this is wrong, that cutting down an unarmed prisoner is not justice, it is execution. In this moment, all he had to do to end the war is swing his saber aside and let Mace finish it. Instead, he holds the line. Mace's gaze narrows. He reminds Anakin that this is not some common criminal. This is the Sith Lord who orchestrated the Clone Wars, who ordered massacres on Geonosis, who has the clones bound by commands only he can unlock. If he lives, the Jedi die. The choice seems obvious. Anakin shakes his head. He looks past Mace, past the broken office to the Senate dome outside. If the Jedi execute the Chancellor without a trial, he says, every holocam in the galaxy will show robed warriors standing over a dead, unarmed leader. Sidious has spent years whispering about Jedi overreach, about a military order seizing power. Kill him now, and it will look exactly like a Jedi coup. The Senate will turn. The clones will obey their last lawful commander, not the Council. Under that pressure, Anakin's secrets crack. He confesses in a rush that Palpatine has been in his mind for years, that the Chancellor ordered Dooku's execution on the invisible hand, that Anakin obeyed. He admits Sidious promised knowledge the Jedi forbade, power over death itself, a way to save Padme from visions of dying in childbirth. The Chosen One stands there, exposed, admitting how close the Sith came to having him right where he wanted him. Mace hears all of it. The betrayal, the manipulation, the danger. His blade wavers over Sidious's throat as he weighs the fate of the Jedi against the boy he once voted to train. He made a choice on Geonosis to trust Anakin's potential. Now he must trust his judgment or end the threat in front of him forever. Slowly, Mace lowers his saber. He agrees, through clenched teeth, to bring Sidious before the Senate, to force the galaxy to see the Sith for what he is. But he warns Anakin that this mercy may doom them all, that some enemies twist chains even from prison. And as clone boots thunder closer down the hall, that fragile compromise becomes their only path forward. Calling the Council, exposing the Sith in the heart of Coruscant clone, boots thunder closer. But this time, they are not the executioners of an unseen order. They are witnesses. Mace snaps his comm from his belt. His voice is low, controlled, but edged with something like fear as he opens a secure temple channel. Across the stars, in the shadowed forests of Kashyyyk, Yoda pauses mid-stride as the hologram flickers to life. Ki-Adi-Mundi leans over a console on Megiddo. Other council members appear in fractured blue light around Mace in the shattered office. The Chancellor is the Sith Lord, Mace states. No preamble, no ceremony, just the truth. Lightning-scarred walls and the twisted form of Sidious behind him say the rest. For a heartbeat, no one speaks. Even Yoda's ancient eyes narrow, as if the fate of the Jedi Order has been mocking them from the very heart of Coruscant. Anakin steps into frame. His jaw is tight, his blade extinguished, his gaze refusing to flinch. He confirms everything. The Plagueis legend, the manipulation of the Council, the secret trust Palpatine cultivated in him for years. In this moment, the Chosen One is not a weapon, but a witness. Orders move faster than shock. Within minutes, Jedi strike teams and temple guards are racing through Coruscant's traffic lanes, gunships banking hard toward the Senate district. Yellow-masked guardians spill into the Chancellor's private corridor, their pikes igniting as they form layered lines. Clone squads are pushed back, disarmed, confused by the sudden reversal of authority. Mace takes Sidious's weapon himself. The curved hilt that had spat crimson death a moment ago is stripped from the fallen Sith and sealed in a containment case. Specialized force-dampening restraints, reserved for the most dangerous dark side cultists, lock around Palpatine's wrists, neck, and ankles with a hiss. For the first time in decades, the most powerful man in the Republic cannot so much as lift a finger. As the Council's images watch, reactions fracture. Ki-Adi-Mundi is stunned that the Sith hid in plain sight, cloaked in law and procedure instead of shadows. Plo Koon's silence carries a deep, simmering anger that Anakin never fully exposed how close he stood to the Chancellor's fire. Even Yoda feels a ripple of dread about how the Senate will react when told that their savior, their wartime leader, was the enemy all along. Then Anakin speaks, and everything shifts. He insists on full transparency. No quiet coup, no secret disappearance. He volunteers to testify before the entire Senate, to recount every conversation in that office, every promise of power, every whispered doubt about the Jedi. He makes it clear that he was both victim and accomplice, that he made a choice to trust a Sith instead of his family and the Order, and that the galaxy deserves to see that mistake laid bare. Pattern breaks. For once, the Council does not simply decide for the Republic. They prepare to stand alongside it, exposed. But as Temple technicians trace encrypted signals through the clone army's command net, a darker realization dawns. Hidden protocols, inhibitor chips, words buried in Kaminoan code that no Jedi ever authorized. Sidious sights in chains, right where he wanted him in his own design. Yet his final contingency may already be humming inside millions of soldiers. The Sith Lord has fallen, but Order 66 still exists as a loaded weapon in the dark, and no one knows who or what might pull the trigger next. The Order 66 time bomb. Can the Jedi outrun a hidden command? That revelation hits the Council chamber like a silent explosion. The war might be ending, the Sith Lord might be in chains, but somewhere in the veins of the Grand Army, a buried sentence waits for a single spoken word. In this moment, the Jedi finally understand that the clones were never just soldiers. They were a system. Shak Ti's voice is steady, but her eyes betray the weight of it. In canon history that will never be, Order 66 would have been a simple voice command, Palpatine's authorization pulsing through every inhibitor chip at once, turning friends into executioners. But here, the Sith is broken, his jaw clamped, his tongue trapped behind Mandalorian steel. No open channel, no clear way to speak the words that damn the Jedi. And yet the fate of the Order cannot rest on that hope alone. Ki-Adi-Mundi leans over the holotable, calling up Kaminoan schematics, hidden subroutines, encrypted voice prints, layers of command buried under polite clinical language. If Sidious was careful enough to grow an army in plain sight, he was careful enough to design contingencies, pre-recorded orders, dead man triggers, perhaps even secondary authorizations bound to trusted intermediaries like Mas Amedda, loyal not to the Republic, but to the office of Chancellor itself. Across the city, Mas Amedda stands in a darkened Senate communication tower, watching the emergency news feeds stutter between images of Palpatine's arrest and the burning front lines of Maijito and Felucia. Sealed in his private console, a set of codes waits, locked behind biometric keys and a final condition. If the Supreme Chancellor is incapacitated, the protocol may pass to the Grand Vizier. All he had to do, one day, was speak the phrase. Back in the Council chamber, the debate fractures. Some masters argue for recalling every clone battalion to Coruscant, disarming the chips under Temple supervision before any hidden command can fire. Others bristle at the image that would send across the galaxy, Jedi summoning the entire army to their doorstep while the Senate reels. A single wrong step and a defensive move could look like a coup. Anakin stands at the center of it all, armor scorched, eyes haunted by 1,000 battlefields. He has seen clones charge artillery fire without hesitation, hold lines against impossible odds, follow Jedi into darkness on nothing but a word. Their loyalty is real, their conditioning is deeper. He made a choice to trust them with his life. But now the Chosen One sees the trap beneath that trust. If Palpatine embedded a kill switch, obedience is not a bond. It is a fuse. He tells the Council that clones do not hesitate when a superior officer gives an order, even if that order feels wrong. Lightning, screams, and the flash of blue and green blades dying in temple hallways flicker across his imagination. A nightmare of a future that almost was. If a distorted recording of Palpatine's voice, or a carefully forged command from Mas Amedda, reaches those chips, the Jedi will not have time to argue about optics. The chamber falls quiet. On the surface, the Sith Lord has fallen. The Republic has its traitor in binders, but beneath that fragile victory, a question coils tighter than any restraining cuff. Have the Jedi cut the head off the snake? Or have they just severed the leash from a weapon designed to fire even without its master? Somewhere in the endless ranks of white armor, something waits to be awakened, and the next move the Jedi make might be the one that tells it when. Padmé's awakening. A senator learns the darkest secret across the city. The storm breaks. Thunder rolls over Coruscant's endless towers, and in a quiet apartment overlooking the Senate dome, Padmé Amidala jolts awake. Her hand goes to her chest before she even understands why. For a heartbeat, there is only terror, a distant roar of lightning in the Force that is not hers but his. Anakin, panic, fire, the sense of a blade raised and a destiny about to shatter. Then, just as suddenly, an eerie calm, not peace, restraint, a storm held back by sheer will. In this moment, sitting alone in the shadows of Coruscant, she feels her husband make a choice that ripples through her like a physical shock. The fate of something vast has just shifted, and the galaxy has not caught up yet. The door chime cuts through the silence. Not Anakin's code, sharper, official. Padmé pulls on a robe, every step heavy with the echo of that unseen struggle. And when the door slides open, Obi-Wan Kenobi stands there with Bail Organa at his side. Both men are soaked from the rain, both carrying the same haunted look in their eyes. Senator Amidala, Bail begins, formal out of habit, but his voice betrays the urgency. Obi-Wan cannot wait. He steps forward. Palpatine has been arrested, he says, each word deliberate as if speaking them might still be treason. By the Jedi, on charges of being a Sith Lord. The room tilts. For years, Palpatine has been her ally, her political mentor, the calm center in the Senate's chaos. A Sith Lord, the mind that guided Reconstruction, the hand that steered emergency powers, suddenly revealed as the architect of the war. Her breath catches, but Obi-Wan is not finished. Anakin was there, he adds softly. He helped disarm him. He insisted on a trial. Relief slams into horror. Anakin is alive. Anakin stood against a Sith. Anakin stood against the Chancellor. Every memory of Palpatine's kindness now replays with new, sickening context. The gentle advice, the subtle praise, the way he always seemed to have the Senate right where he wanted it. In this moment, Padmé sees the pattern beneath the politics, and it terrifies her. Her mind races ahead of her heartbeat. If the Chancellor is a Sith, then the war has been a lie. If the war has been a lie, then every system that bled for the Republic has been used. The Senate will not accept that easily. Some will call the Jedi saviors, others will call them usurpers, with blades at the throat of democracy. She thinks of emergency powers, of loyalist committees, of planets that already whisper about secession, the fate of the Republic, of the Jedi, of the galaxy. It all suddenly hangs on how this story is told. Obi-Wan speaks of inhibitor chips and hidden orders, of a command buried in the clones like a ticking mine. Bail speaks of legal precedent, of tribunals and public evidence. Padme's fear hardens into purpose. No secret executions, no midnight disappearances. If the Jedi simply vanish the Chancellor, half the galaxy will swear the Sith still rule in the shadows. All he had to do, Obi-Wan says, was let Mace strike, and this would already be over. But the Chosen One stayed his hand, and now everything depends on a lawful path forward. Her decision crystallizes. I need to see Anakin, she says, more to herself than to them, not just as a wife, but as a senator who understands that the key witness against a Sith Lord is also the Republic's most dangerous symbol. She must look into his eyes, hear what happened in that office, and decide how to stand beside him when the Senate learns the truth. Padme turns toward the window, toward the distant spires of the Jedi Temple framed in lightning. The storm outside is moving there, and so is she. Whatever new order rises from this chaos, whatever trial decides the fate of Palpatine, and the clones bound to his command, it will begin with what is said in those halls tonight. She gathers her cloak, steps past Obi-Wan and Bail, and walks into the rain, heading straight for the temple, and for the confrontation that will decide not only their marriage, but the future shape of the Republic itself. Face to face in the temple, Anakin, Padme, and the truth. The rain on Coruscant turns to a silver curtain as Padme's shuttle cuts through the storm, heading straight for the Jedi Temple. Below, the city hums with rumor. Above, the spires of the Order burn with light and fear. In this moment, the fate of the Republic, of the Jedi, of the galaxy, is being decided in hushed corridors and guarded doors. She steps out onto the temple landing platform under heavy escort. Clone troopers in soaked armor form a perimeter, helmets tracking every movement. Jedi knights and temple guards stand opposite them, hands never far from a blade, as if a single wrong word could ignite the war all over again. Whispers ripple through the ranks about the Chancellor's arrest, about Sith lightning crackling in his office, about Anakin Skywalker dragging the truth into the light. Inside, the air is thick with incense and tension. As Padme passes, clones stiffen, Jedi Masters pause mid-stride. No one knows if she is here as senator, as traitor, or as the wife of the Chosen One. For a heartbeat, the temple feels less like a sanctuary and more like a powder keg. Anakin waits for her in a small meditation chamber off a quiet hall. His dark robes are scorched at the sleeves, the faint smell of ozone and burned cloth clinging to him, a memory of lightning crawling over his guard. His hands tremble, not from battle, but from what he is about to say. He has faced a Sith Lord. This terrifies him more. The door hisses open. Her eyes find his, searching, wounded, unbroken. For a long second, neither speaks. All he had to do was lie, and this would be easier. Instead, he made a choice. He tells her everything. The friendship with Palpatine, the flattery, the secret briefings. How the Chancellor turned him against the Council. How he dangled forbidden knowledge like a blade over Padme's throat. The story of Darth Plagueis and the promise of power over death. His anger when the Jedi denied him mastery. His hand almost cutting down Mace Windu. his heart already halfway to the dark side before his blade ever moved. His voice breaks as he admits that, for a moment, saving her mattered more than anything, more than the Jedi, more than the Senate, more than the fate of anyone else in the galaxy. He confesses that Sidious had him right where he wanted him. Padme listens, every word carving new lines into her resolve. When she finally speaks, it is not with rejection, but steel. Becoming a monster to save her, she says, would have destroyed them both, because the man she loves would have been gone even if his body remained. The Sith offered survival without soul. That is not life. She steps closer, placing a hand on his scorched sleeve. The only way forward is truth and justice, even if that justice cuts close to home. If Anakin is complicit, then Anakin must stand before the Council. If the Senate is broken, then she must stand in its center and demand it face what it allowed to grow in its shadows. A new mission takes shape between them. Padme will return to the Senate and fight for a public, transparent trial for Palpatine, for the clones used as tools, for the Jedi branded as traitors. Anakin will walk into the council chamber and accept whatever consequences come, as witness, as weapon, or as warning. For the first time since the office duel, his breathing steadies. The Chosen One will not run from judgment. Side by side, they turn toward twin storms, one of law, one of the Force, knowing that what happens next in those chambers will decide whether this night becomes the birth of a better order, or the first step into a quieter, colder kind of tyranny. Judgment of the Chosen One. Anakin before the Council. The doors of the High Council chamber hissed open to a room that felt wounded. Tall windows bled Coruscant's twilight into a circle of empty chairs, places where Plo Koon, Ki-Adi-Mundi, and others should have been. In their stead, blue holograms flickered to life. Yoda from Kashyyyk, off-world masters from scattered war fronts, ghostly figures staring through static and silence. Anakin stepped forward alone. No cloak, no mask of bravado, just the weight of what he had done and what he had almost done. Obi-Wan halted at the threshold as Mace Windu raised a hand, the meaning clear. This was Anakin's burden. This was the moment the Chosen One would stand or fall, without a blade in his hand. Slowly, Anakin unhooked his lightsaber. The familiar weight left his palm, the metal cylinder hovering in the center of the room as he guided it with the Force toward Mace. "I submit to the judgment of the Council," he said, voice low but steady. In this moment, surrender was not weakness. It was the only way to prove that his fate would not be ruled by fear or by a hidden Sith master. Questions came like strikes in a duel. Windu's eyes were hard. Why had Anakin not revealed Palpatine's true nature the instant he suspected? Why had he obeyed the Chancellor's command and executed Count Dooku, a prisoner and a beaten foe? Each inquiry cut deeper, demanding whether his loyalty had been to the Jedi, or to the promise of power whispered in a politician's office. Anakin's first instinct was to fight back, to snarl that the Council never trusted him, that they put him on the Council but denied him the rank of master, that they used him as a spy against a man who had been his mentor. The old heat rose in his chest, the same heat that had almost driven his blade through Mace moments earlier. All he had to do was unleash it, and he could turn this chamber into another battlefield. He made a choice instead. The words came halting at first. He admitted the secret marriage to Padme, the visions of her dying in childbirth, the story of Darth Plagueis and forbidden Sith techniques that could cheat death, dangled in front of a desperate husband. "I was afraid," Anakin said, the sound of it hanging heavier than any accusation. "Afraid of losing her. Afraid of losing everything." Yoda's hologram leaned forward, ears dipping. Mace pressed on, asking how far the Chancellor's influence had gone. Had Anakin ever considered turning against the Jedi? Had the Sith truly had him right where he wanted him? Anakin did not look away. He confessed the moment in the office, blade raised over a disarmed Palpatine, the heartbeat where he almost chose execution over law, darkness over restraint. The council fell silent. In this circle, the fate of the Order, of the Republic, of the galaxy, all narrowed to one young knight standing unarmed in the center. At last, the verdict came. Censure for his secrecy. A formal reprimand that would follow his record forever. Temporary suspension from active command. No more legions, no more frontline authority until his judgment could be rebuilt. But not exile, not expulsion. Guidance, not casting out. The path must be, Yoda said. The Order chose rehabilitation and transparency over another secret buried in shame. Anakin bowed, feeling the sting of consequence and the faint, unfamiliar relief of finally being seen. Outside, the city roared on, unaware. Inside, as Anakin turned to leave, Obi-Wan's gaze met his, proud, worried, unbroken. The Chosen One still belonged to the Jedi. Yet far below the temple, in a fortified cell not yet finished, a mutilated Sith Lord waited to speak his first poisoned word, and Anakin's confession would give him exactly the weakness he needed to exploit next. The trial of Darth Sidious, turning the Senate into a battlefield. The Senate rotunda trembled with sound. Every pod was occupied, every tier overflowing, as holocams hovered in glittering clouds and broadcast this single chamber to the entire galaxy. In this moment, the fate of the Republic, of the Jedi, of the galaxy itself, hung on what would be said in this room. At the central podium, the great disc irised open. A lift rose from the depths beneath the chamber floor, and on it stood a cage of shimmering blue energy. Inside, shackled, masked, and wrapped in binding fields, the former Supreme Chancellor trembled, not from weakness, but from caged power. Darth Sidious was dragged forward by 4 Jedi, their blades unlit but ready. Mace Windu, Obi-Wan Kenobi, Shak Ti, Anakin Skywalker, the Chosen One. At the front, his eyes never leaving the Sith Lord's hidden face. Gasps rippled outward like a shockwave. Bail Organa's jaw tightened as he rose in his pod, the weight of the Chancellor's office already pressing on his shoulders. Mon Mothma's hands clenched the rail, a flash of vindication in her eyes that this shadow she had always sensed was finally exposed. Padme Amidala stood beside them, pale but unshaken, her gaze flicking from Anakin to the cage, knowing that all he had to do now was stand firm, and the truth would finally break through. Across the chamber, Mazameda's Leku twitched. His eyes darted between factions, calculating. Panic simmered beneath his ceremonial calm as he silently traced the paper trail of decrees, emergency powers, and secret sessions that tied his own fate to the Sith on display. If Palpatine fell completely, how far would the purge of corruption reach? The evidence began. Holoprojectors flared to life, replaying the moment the Senate granted sweeping emergency powers. Palpatine's own voice thundering about security and survival. Another feed showed intercepted separatist transmissions, cross-referenced with hidden Sith holofrequencies, proving that the same hand had guided both sides of the Clone Wars. Jedi Masters testified to manipulated visions, orchestrated crises, and a pattern of engineered fear. Then Anakin stepped forward. The chamber fell into a heavy silence. He spoke of the office confrontation, of Dooku's execution, of the whispered promise of forbidden power over death, and of the revelation that the Chancellor was the very Sith Lord the Jedi had hunted since Naboo. Each word was sworn under the code. Each detail cut another thread of Palpatine's public mask. But as the proof mounted, a different terror crept through the pods. To admit that their beloved leader was a Sith meant admitting that an entire generation of senators had been blind, or willing, or both. Some clutched at procedure, others at outrage, but beneath it all lay a single dread question. If they confessed this failure, would the galaxy ever trust the Republic again? Debate raged for hours. Calls for immediate execution crashed against demands for due process and fear of martyring a monster in chains. In the end, the Senate made a choice. They voted, overwhelmingly, to strip Palpatine of all titles, to brand him traitor and Sith, and to remand him to permanent confinement in a secure off-world facility, pending deeper investigation into the full extent of his conspiracy. It was not justice, not yet, but it was enough to move him from the center of power to the edge of a cell. And far below, behind his muzzle and scars, Palpatine's yellow eyes narrowed. The Republic thought it had him right where it wanted him. It had only given him time. Clones without an emperor. The army's crisis of loyalty. The cell door sealed on the fallen Chancellor, and above his hidden prison, the war machine he had built began to shudder. Across the stars, clone commanders felt the tremor, first not in the Force, but in their helmets. Static, half-finished orders. Conflicting codes from Coruscant that cut through ongoing battles like stray blaster bolts. On Utapau, Cody stood on a rain-slick balcony, helmet clipped to his belt as a crackling transmission stuttered in his ear. Chancellor, under arrest. Jedi Council assumes. Then silence. The words made no sense. The Supreme Commander of the Grand Army, a traitor. His training screamed one thing. His memory of Obi-Wan's steady hand on his shoulder screamed another. In this moment, duty and loyalty were no longer the same path. Rex heard the same broken message aboard a Venator above Maigito. Beside him, Ahsoka's eyes narrowed, feeling a disturbance that had nothing to do with Sith lightning or blades drawn in anger. The bridge crew waited for Rex to decide. All he had to do was repeat the last clear phrase, turn it into an order. Instead, he made a choice. Hold position, defensive posture only. No one fires unless fired upon. The words hung in the air like a suspended hammer. The Jedi Council moved just as fast. In the temple war room, luminous blue holomaps flickered, while masters traded sharp, clipped sentences. Windu's jaw was still bruised from the duel with Sidious. Yoda's ears drooped with the weight of the fate of the Republic. A single command was transmitted on every secure channel. All clone units to stand down from offensive operations, fortify current positions, and await clarification from the Senate and the Council. No more surprise assaults, no more sudden campaigns. The entire Grand Army frozen mid-stride. On Kamino, the stillness felt different. Jedi investigators arrived with questions the Kaminoans had never intended to answer. Shakti walked the sterile corridors while rain hammered the domes, her presence a quiet storm of suspicion. Data vaults spoke of behavioral compliance matrices, of inhibitor chips keyed to classified contingency protocols. The words Order 66 surfaced only as a buried reference, a ghost in the code that even the Kaminoans pretended not to fully understand. That was the pattern: interrupt. The clones had been bred to obey, but no one had told them there was something inside their skulls to enforce it. Rumors spread faster than official briefings. Bly, stationed with Ayla Secura on Felucia, stared at a medical scan projected in front of him. A tiny foreign shape nestled near the brainstem. He could dismantle a DC-15 in seconds, but this was a piece of himself he had never chosen. Some reacted with fury to be told that their supreme commander had been a Sith, that the Jedi had unmasked him. Felt like betrayal layered on betrayal. Others, like Rex and Cody, quietly asked a more dangerous question. If their loyalty could be switched by a hidden command, had any of their choices ever truly been their own? The army did not turn on the Jedi, not this time, but the revelation of such deep manipulation cracked something that had held the Grand Army together. The Chosen One had exposed the Sith, yet the clones now saw that the Republic itself had treated them as tools, not brothers. In the uneasy ceasefire that followed, the Jedi began to speak of reforms, of phasing out blind obedience and dismantling the hidden protocols buried on Camino. The Republic still had its soldiers, for now, but their faith would never again be manufactured so easily. The separatist endgame. Without Vader, who ends the war? But as the clones stood down and the temple fires dimmed, another storm was gathering far from Coruscant. On Mustafar and Canon, Darth Vader would have arrived as the Emperor's new fist, blade in hand, to butcher the Separatist Council and end the war in a single, brutal night. In this timeline, that massacre never comes. Anakin is still Jedi. Sidious is chained in a Mandalorian vault. The droid foundries keep turning. The war machine keeps breathing. Without their Sith master's voice in their ears, the Separatist leaders feel the ground vanish beneath them. Count Dooku's death still echoes through their council chamber, a phantom presence at every strategy table. General Grievous stalks the holoprojectors, metal fingers flexing, demanding total war. The corporate heads of the banking clan, the trade federation, the techno union stare back with calculating eyes. Their Sith patron is gone. The promised victory is slipping away, and no one is quite sure who holds the fate of their cause now. In this moment, the Republic makes a different move. Instead of unleashing Vader on Mustafar, the Jedi Council authorizes something that would have been unthinkable only weeks earlier. Back-channel talks with the very systems they have been ordered to destroy. Shakti, Obi-Wan, Ahsoka, even Plo Koon begin reaching out through trusted contacts on neutral worlds. Anakin watches the hollows of Sidious's trial recordings, lightning frozen in mid-frame as evidence, and understands that all he had to do in that office was refuse to kneel. Now the entire galaxy can see the Sith for what they are. Republic envoys arrive with proof. Secret Kaminoan contracts signed under Palpatine's emergency powers. Audio of Dooku speaking with his supposed enemy. Holorecords of inhibitor chip research buried in military archives. The message is simple and devastating. Both sides were played, their dead offered on an altar to a single hidden Sith. Padme steps into this breach like she was born for it. While Bail Organa takes the Chancellor's podium, she moves in the shadows between fleets and front lines. Secret meetings on Alderaanian medical ships, secure channels routed through Naboo's diplomatic corps. She and Bail draft an offer that would have made the old Senate gasp. Amnesty for separatist worlds, protection from corporate retaliation, and guaranteed representation in a reformed Senate if they lay down arms. No more puppet corporations holding entire sectors hostage. No more emergency powers. The Chosen One is not a single warrior now, but a coalition choosing to end the cycle. Grievous rages at the very idea. To him, peace is surrender, and his hatred of the Jedi burns hotter than ever. The Techno-Union tallies potential losses. The banking clan weighs interest rates against annihilation, and smaller worlds scarred by Republic bombardments listen to Padme's words with guarded hope. He made a choice in that office, and now Anakin stands ready to lead a final campaign if talks fail, saber at his side, determined that this last push will not become another Sith slaughter. But as the offers go out and fleets reposition, a question hangs over both sides like a drawn blade. Do hardened warlords like Grievous and the Techno-Union truly accept peace? Or does someone else, watching from the shadows of this fragile truce, step into the Sith vacuum to keep the war burning just a little longer, right where he wanted him? Ahsoka's return. The Padawan who walked away. Across the lower levels of Coruscant, the war ends as a rumor before it ends as a fact. Holofeeds flicker in dingy cantinas. Garbled reports of a Sith Chancellor exposed by the Jedi, of battle droids standing down, of fleets freezing in place. The fate of the Republic, of the Jedi, of the galaxy is suddenly being debated over cheap drinks and illegal sayback. On one forgotten frequency, a pirate signal carries more than gossip. It carries courtroom images of Palpatine's twisted face, of Mace Windu's blade held at his throat, of Anakin Skywalker standing between them, demanding a trial. That signal bounces off relays, slips past blockades, and reaches the outer systems where deserters and ghosts make their homes. On one of those worlds, in a half-abandoned warehouse lit by a single blue holoprojector, Katano stares in silence. The Jedi who once expelled her now stand as the Republic's last line against a Sith conspiracy that touched every layer of power. In this moment, her Leku trembles slightly as she watches Palpatine's confession scroll across the crawl. Treason, Sith Lord, architect of the Clone Wars. It vindicates everything and solves nothing. The Council had been blind. The Order had been used. All he had to do, the Chancellor had believed, was keep the Chosen One close, and the rest would fall. Ahsoka feels anger rise, not at Anakin, but at the system that broke both of them in different ways. Her contact, a former clone who scraped out his inhibitor chip and vanished, asked the question she will not. What now? Return to an order that doubted her, or stay gone while the galaxy reshapes itself without her voice? She closes her eyes and remembers the council chamber, the cold verdict, Anakin's desperate promise that he believed her even when the others did not. He made a choice then. So did she. Days later, a Jedi transport sets down on that forgotten world. The ramp lowers, steam curling around armored boots and brown robes. Anakin steps into the light, eyes searching the shadows until he sees her. Ahsoka, older, harder, still carrying the same fierce spark that once turned training rooms into battlefields of laughter and argument. For a heartbeat, neither moves. The war, the trials, the betrayals, all hang between them like an unignited blade. Then Anakin crosses the distance in 3 long strides. His voice catches as he apologizes, not in grand Jedi phrases, but in broken, specific words. For not walking out with her, for trusting Palpatine's counsel, for letting secrecy wrap around him until even she could not see through it. Ahsoka does not let him escape with regret alone. She confronts him about every closed door, every quiet meeting with the Chancellor, about how the chosen one of the Jedi could stand so near the Sith and never feel the darkness. Anakin takes the blows, shoulders bowed, admitting that power and fear clouded his sight. The system failed them both, he says, but so did their own choices. When the storm of words finally breaks, what remains is something new. Ahsoka stands not as Padawan, not as Jedi, not as Sith. She has walked away from the code and survived without the dark, and that gives her a freedom Anakin cannot yet imagine. She tells him the order must change, or it will die in a different kind of blindness, not from a single Sith, but from a slow, quiet decay. In this moment, Ahsoka becomes a bridge. She refuses to kneel before the council again, but she agrees to stand beside Anakin, to advise him as he pushes for reform instead of rebellion. She will slip between worlds, helping stabilize planets stunned by the war's sudden end, calming clones who question their own memories, guiding separatist worlds toward this fragile peace. Anakin watches her ship depart on that first quiet mission, knowing the fate of everything he is trying to build may depend on this ally outside the temple walls. And somewhere far away, in a Mandalorian vault where lightning once danced from hidden fingers, another set of eyes opens, sensing that the Jedi have found a new kind of strength he did not plan for, right where he wanted him. Rewriting the code, Anakin's fight to reform. The Jedi. Anakin Skywalker stood in the council chamber again. The same ring of chairs, the same view of Coruscant's endless traffic, but a different man at the center. The fate of the Jedi, of the Republic, of the galaxy itself, no longer pressed on him as a storm he could not control. In this moment, it felt like something he could finally shape. He bowed first. No anger, no accusations. Just a slow, deliberate breath as his eyes met Yoda's. The chosen one who once demanded a master's rank now approached with proposals instead of ultimatums. He spoke plainly, admitting that the Order's fear of attachment had almost delivered him to the Sith, that their silence about love had left him alone with secrets Sidious could twist into chains. Anakin did not raise his blade. He raised hard truths. He described how hiding Padme, hiding his own children, had fractured his trust in the council more than any battle ever could. All he had to do back then was confess his terror of loss, and there might have been another path. Instead, the Jedi had taught him to bury feelings until a Sith offered to understand them, so he laid out reforms like a battle plan. The Jedi would no longer deny family bonds, but guide them, allowing marriages under strict codes of service and transparency. So love became a strength instead of a secret. Younglings would not be taken as infants without consent and context. Parents would be partners, not ghosts. Emotional mentorship would be formalized, with masters trained to speak of fear, anger, and desire, rather than pretending those storms did not exist. A pattern interrupt cut through the chamber. Not a shout. A question. Anakin asked how many Jedi had fallen, because they were told to suppress what made them living beings, and how many Sith had risen by promising to listen. The silence that followed hit harder than any lightning. The older masters resisted first. Ki-Adi-Mundi warned that loosening discipline would open the door to more falls, that attachment had destroyed orders before. Plo Koon, scarred from the war, feared a generation of Jedi more loyal to families than to peace itself. They saw the code as the last wall between light and shadow. But the younger knights, the ones who had survived ambushes, betrayals, and the Chancellor's secret plots, shifted in their seats. They had watched rigid doctrine fail in real time. Ahsoka Tano stepped forward, no longer the Padawan who once walked away, but a bridge between what the Order had been and what it might become. She backed Anakin's critique with her own scars, speaking of how the Council's blind spots had driven her out. how the lack of trust had nearly cost them the Chosen One and everything he was meant to protect. Yet beside her, Obi-Wan Kenobi urged caution. He agreed the code must change, but warned that too much, too fast, could splinter what remained of the Jedi into rival factions and leave the galaxy defenseless. So Anakin adjusted. He made a choice not to win an argument, but to keep the order intact. He accepted a gradual approach, a trial period for these reforms, limited to a new generation of Padawans and knights, watched closely by the council. Yoda's eyes closed, then opened with a tired clarity. Change, he admitted. The Jedi had feared for too long. The council agreed to the trial, to families acknowledged, to feelings spoken, to training that embraced the whole being instead of carving it apart. In that decision, a more human, less monastic Jedi order began to take shape, with Anakin not as its destroyer, but as the architect at its center. And far away, in a Mandalorian vault of durasteel and silence, a defeated Sith Lord felt the currents shift and started to plan how this new compassion might be turned against them in the years to come. The Skywalker family that never broke, Padme, Anakin, and the twins. Across the galaxy, the shockwaves of a spared order and a caged Sith slowly faded into something quieter. In their place, another rhythm began to rise. The steady pulse of medical monitors on a shining world of white durasteel and glass. Padme Amidala lay propped against soft pillows, one hand on her swelling stomach, the other wrapped tightly around Anakin's fingers. In this moment, everything felt almost ordinary. No roaring crowds, no thunder of blaster fire, only the soft hum of droids and the low murmur of healers conferring with Jedi masters. Anakin's eyes moved from Padme to the hovering scans, watching twin heartbeats flicker in soft blue light. Fear still lived in him, coiled and waiting, but it no longer ruled him. He had told the council the truth. He had told Padme his visions, and instead of hiding, instead of grasping for forbidden power, he made a choice to trust them. Jedi healers from the temple, midwives from Naboo, and the finest specialists of this secure medical world all stood ready. They monitored blood pressure and oxygen levels, not prophecies. They spoke of placentas and recovery time, not the dark side. Without the burning sands of Mustafar, without Anakin's betrayal and Padme's shattered heart, her body bore only the strain any mother of twins might face. The danger that remained was physical, measurable, something medicine and the Force could confront together. Obi-Wan visited often, cloak folded neatly over one arm, offering quiet jokes that did not quite hide the emotion in his eyes. Ahsoka brought fruit from distant worlds and stories from the frontiers, where clones now helped rebuild instead of destroy. Bail Organa arrived with datapads full of reform bills, but he always set them aside at the door, bowing with genuine warmth to the woman who had helped place him in the Chancellor's office. Around Padme's bed, the future of the Senate and the future of the Jedi met in simple human concern. The day of birth came with a storm outside the transparasteel windows. Rain streaked down in silver lines as med-droids moved into position. Anakin stood at Padme's side, guided by a calm master healer, breathing with her, anchoring her pain in the light. All he had to do was remain present, keep the terror of his old visions from swallowing him. The fate of this family, of the Jedi, of the galaxy, it all seemed to narrow to the rise and fall of her chest. Luke arrived first, red-faced and furious, his tiny hands already reaching, as if grasping for a blade that was not there. Leia followed moments later, quieter, her eyes opening almost at once, studying the world with an unsettling, focused calm. Obi-Wan cut the cords with a reverent precision. Ahsoka laughed through tears, and Bail stepped back, understanding instinctively that history was watching. Holocams did not enter that room, but the story did not stay contained. Across the holonet, the narrative formed quickly. The chosen one who had unmasked a Sith Chancellor now had children. To some, Luke and Leia became living proof that the Force had not abandoned the Republic. To others, they were a warning, symbols of a bloodline that sat at the intersection of Senate power and Jedi mystique. Padme held both infants while Anakin knelt beside the bed, and in that small circle, titles fell away. No one spoke of dynasties. No one spoke of destiny. Yet in the corridors outside, aides already whispered about what it meant for a Skywalker to stand in the council chamber, and another in the Senate rotunda someday. Guardians of peace, or the seeds of something far more dangerous. It would depend on how they were raised, on which stories they heard, on which fears were fed and which were faced. And far below this peaceful world, in a silent Mandalorian vault, a mutilated Sith Lord listened through the currents of the dark side, sensing twin new lights in the Force, and beginning to shape a plan to turn this unbroken family into the perfect weapon. Growing up, Skywalker, Luke and Leia as Jedi. From day one, on Coruscant, the temple corridors echoed with a very different kind of sound. Not alarms, not blaster fire, laughter. Small feet slapped against polished stone as two toddlers, golden hair and dark brown braids flying behind them, raced past towering Jedi statues, their giggles chasing away old ghosts of war and fire. Luke skidded around a corner with arms out like a starfighter, while Leia ran straight through a cluster of robed knights, bowing in quick apology the way Bail had taught her, then immediately tugging Luke's sleeve to remind him to do the same. In this moment, the fate of the Order did not rest on a council debate or a Senate vote. It rested on whether these children could learn to move through power without believing it was theirs by right. Their days were a careful braid of worlds. Mornings began on Naboo-style balconies, Padme wrapped in a light shawl against the Coruscant breeze, guiding them through simple breathing as the city roared below. She spoke softly about farmers on Ryloth, miners on Kessel, refugees who needed senators who listened. Then Anakin arrived from drills, cloak still dusty from the training grounds, dropping to one knee as two small comets hurled into his arms. Lessons changed the second he entered. A handful of training remotes hovered in front of Luke and Leia, their tiny faces scrunched in concentration as wooden toys rose and wobbled in the air. Anakin turned focus into play, telling them the Force was like the wind in the grass on Naboo, or the waves around Alderaan's islands, something that moved through all life, not a weapon to be gripped. All he had to do was make them laugh while they learned, pushing floating blocks just out of reach, teaching them to sense each other's presence around blind corners, to trust connection more than sight. Padme watched with careful eyes. Between sessions, she walked them through miniature Senate chambers built from holoprojectors, assigning Luke the role of a frightened governor, Leia the mediator who must listen before speaking. The children learned that power without empathy was just another kind of storm, and that a Jedi's blade meant nothing if it did not defend the voiceless. The Reformed Order refused to repeat old mistakes. No secret separations, no lies about parentage, yet also no dynasties. The Council codified strict safeguards. Luke and Leia would train with Obi-Wan, Ahsoka, Plo Koon, even Shak Ti, never only with their father. Missions involving the Skywalker family were reviewed twice, and archivists quietly tracked how often their names appeared in critical decisions, wary of concentrating too much influence in one bloodline. Compared to the canon future, it was a different childhood entirely. There was no lonely boy staring at twin suns on Tatooine, no princess hiding her Force sensitivity behind royal etiquette and coded messages. Early training and secure attachment blunted the sharp edge of fear. Nightmares of loss met not with silence, but with Anakin's arms and Padme's steady voice. Yet the galaxy still whispered, the chosen one's children, the heirs of Organa and Amidala, legends in the making. The question that lingered over every temple balcony and Senate corridor was simple and terrifying. Growing up as open symbols of hope, would Luke and Leia become humbler servants of the galaxy, or entitled heirs who might one day turn their power against the very institutions their parents had rebuilt, right where he wanted them? Palpatine in chains, not ashes. The Sith Lord's long game. But far from the Senate's bright rotunda, far from the temple balconies where those questions echoed, the answer to that fear sat in chains, on a forgotten world ringed with ice and auroras, buried beneath kilometers of rock and Beskar. The former Chancellor of the Republic waited in the dark. The Mandalorian vault that once held the galaxy's most dangerous weapons now held only one prisoner. His hands were ruined, fingers twisted and seared from the reflected lightning that had exposed him. His face was a map of age and corruption. But behind the muzzle that dampened his voice and the force-dampening binders that pinned him to the chair, Darth Sidious's eyes still burned like twin embers. In this moment, the Jedi believed they had him contained. Rotating masters kept vigil, meditating in shifts, sealing the chamber in layers of light and discipline. Knights checked the generators, clones and Mandalorian guards patrolled the outer corridors, and every sensor screamed if even a whisper of dark side energy spiked. On paper, the fate of the Sith looked sealed, but Sidious had always thrived between the lines. He watched the guards' footsteps, the tiny hesitations, the way a clone's helmet lingered on a Jedi's back. He listened to the quiet resentment of Mandalorians, forced to serve the very order that had once hunted them. He could not hurl lightning now, but he could still let a single phrase slip through the muzzle, a single poisoned question. Had the Jedi simply traded one emergency power for another? All he had to do was wait. A visiting senator granted a strictly monitored interview for the sake of transparency. A military officer scarred from the war, curious how close the clones had come to turning. They arrived convinced they were stronger than him. They left with a seed of doubt. Doubt about the Jedi's new influence. Doubt about Bail Organa's reforms. Doubt about any future in which the Chosen One and his order did not stand above the law. The pattern interrupt came from the archives, not the vault. Years before his arrest, Sidious had scattered Sith holocrons in forgotten temples, in separatist caches, even within the foundations of Coruscant itself. Each crystal pyramid was a silent apprentice, waiting for the right hands. Some belonged to nameless acolytes who had never stepped into the light of the Senate, trained in secret as shadows of a future that no longer existed. Or so the Jedi believed. From his chair, chained and maimed, Sidious felt them like distant sparks. A failed senator on Corellia, tempted by a holocron's promise of control, a disillusioned admiral, visiting the vault under the pretense of security review, lingering just a little too long as the old man in the chair rasped about necessary evils and strong hands to guide the fleet. He made a choice with every breath he spent. Not rage, not despair, but investment. Each whispered conversation, each subtle nudge, built a network of sympathizers who did not call themselves Sith, but who slowly began to see him as a counterweight to Jedi overreach. The galaxy believed it had been spared the open terror of an empire. Instead, it had entered a long, cold shadow war. The Sith Lord was caged, but not broken, and in the quiet between his heartbeats, he saw a different path to victory. Not as emperor on a throne of star destroyers, but as the hidden hand that would one day turn the heirs of Organa and Amidala against everything they loved, right where he wanted them. A republic reborn, or a new kind of empire. But while Sidious sat in his living tomb, the galaxy outside his prison was being rebuilt in his absence. The war ended not with an empire's declaration, but with a reckoning. On Coruscant, the Senate chamber that once roared for emergency powers now echoed with something far more dangerous to a would-be tyrant: regret. The first decrees came fast. Bail Organa, newly elected as Chancellor, stood beneath the fractured pods and announced that all emergency powers granted to Palpatine were rescinded, effective immediately. Term limits, quietly eroded over a decade of fear, were not only reinstated, they were hardened into the very bones of the Republic's constitution. No chancellor could serve beyond 2 terms. No office could hold both military and civil command. In this moment, the Senate tried to chain the very idea of another Sidious. Padme, frail from childbirth yet unbroken in spirit, returned to the floor alongside Bail and Mon Mothma as the heart of a reformist bloc. They pushed for demilitarization, arguing that a permanent war machine had almost delivered the fate of the galaxy into the hands of a single Sith. They called for the gradual decommissioning of the clone legions, for planetary defense forces to return to local control, for stronger autonomy so that outer rim worlds would never again feel ruled by distant lightning and decrees. Behind the scenes, Anakin watched from the Chancellor's balcony, arms folded, eyes searching the chamber. He had ended one war with his blade, but this was a different kind of battle. All he had to do now was protect the fragile peace Padme was building. He knew that the Chosen One could not simply win duels. He had to guard the institutions that decided the fate of the Republic itself. Not everyone welcomed this new order. Corporate interests, from the remnants of the Trade Federation to the banking clan, lobbied furiously against strict oversight and the breakup of wartime monopolies. Regional governors, who had tasted near-imperial authority over their sectors, whispered that without central control, chaos would return. Some admirals and clone commanders, shaped by years of total war, quietly warned that demilitarization was naive, while a living Sith Lord still breathed in a vault. To answer those fears, the Jedi accepted something unthinkable in the old era: formal limits. The Order's new charter was written directly into the Republic's laws. The Jedi would remain guardians of peace, but no longer as secretive warrior monks drifting above scrutiny. Every deployment required Senate authorization, except in narrowly defined emergencies. Financial records, training practices, even the criteria for taking younglings were subject to independent review. Their role as generals ended. Their role as public servants began. Anakin, Obi-Wan, and Ahsoka stood before the council as these changes were ratified. They made a choice to open temple archives to civilian historians, to establish a permanent liaison office in the Senate, to submit to an ethics committee that included non-Force sensitives. For the first time, the line between Jedi and citizen was not a wall, but a bridge. Yet beneath the hopeful speeches, an old tension coiled. Security versus freedom. Central order versus local choice. A republic reborn carried the scars of what it almost became. And in those scars, future conflicts were already taking shape. Because while the republic had avoided an empire in name, somewhere in the shadows of the Mandalorian vault, a patient Sith listened to every broadcast, every reform, and quietly mapped how to turn this new, shining system against itself, right where he wanted it. Obi-Wan, without a broken heart, the Master's new path. Across the city, as the Republic reshaped itself in the Senate halls, another life was quietly being rebuilt in the Jedi Temple. Obi-Wan Kenobi stood alone on a high balcony, watching Coruscant's traffic streams twist like rivers of light. And for the first time in years, his chest did not feel like a clenched fist. Anakin was alive. Anakin was still a Jedi. The fate of everything they had fought for had not devoured the man he had raised. Yet relief did not come without a cost. In this moment of calm, guilt pressed in harder than any Sith blade. Obi-Wan replayed the office, Mace's purple lightsaber at Sidious's throat, the crackling lightning, Anakin's torn expression. He knew how close the Chosen One had come to falling, how a single misstep, a single word could have twisted that choice. And he asked himself again and again if all he had to do years ago was listen more, bend more, love more openly. On the council, he had defended the code, the old ways, the distance demanded between Jedi and attachment. But Anakin's secret marriage, Padmé's pregnancy, the nightmares, all of it had grown in the cracks of that distance. Obi-Wan could see it now with painful clarity. He made a choice after the trial of Palpatine, after the inhibitor chips were exposed, after Bail Organa called for a gentler republic. Obi-Wan laid down the rank of frontline general and asked for something different. A classroom. Soon, the war hero who once led charges on Utapau and Christophsis was pacing quiet training halls instead of trenches. Younglings sat cross-legged as he spoke, not about killing droids, but about reading eyes in a negotiation, about hearing fear behind anger, about walking away from a fight that pride wanted to win. Emotional intelligence, patience, humility, these became his campaigns. His lessons used Anakin as an example, not of failure, but of how close even the brightest can come to the edge when the Order forgets the person behind the power. Outside the temple, another role took shape. On Naboo's sun-drenched balconies, Luke and Leia clung to his robes, laughing as Uncle Obi-Wan pretended to lose wooden practice sabers to their clumsy swings. In the Senate apartments, Padmé listened as he quietly translated Anakin's worries into policy concerns, turning raw fear for the galaxy into measured reforms. In council sessions, Obi-Wan's calm presence became the counterweight to Anakin's intensity, the steady hand that asked the question Anakin would not. At what cost? In the stillness between missions and lessons, he found himself drawn back to Qui-Gon Jinn's old hollow recordings. The living force, compassion over dogma, trusting what one felt instead of what rules allowed. Obi-Wan had once thought his master reckless. Now he saw that Qui-Gon had been pointing at the path the Jedi needed all along. Anakin's survival, the Order's narrow escape from extinction, all of it seemed to confirm that rigid detachment had nearly destroyed them. So when the Reformed Council proposed a new position, Obi-Wan did not hesitate. Not Grand Master, not Battle Commander, but a quieter title, the Temple's moral arbiter, the the first among equals, whose task was to ask whether the Jedi were still serving the living force, or merely their own traditions, less a warrior, more a conscience. In this moment, Obi-Wan accepted that his destiny was not to win the last war, but to guard against the next one, to stand watch so that no future Skywalker would ever face the same terrible choice at the edge of a Sith's shadow. Yoda's last lesson: adapting instead of exiling. Across the city, as Obi-Wan stepped into this new role of quiet sentinel, another starship cut through Coruscant's clouds and descended toward the Jedi Temple. Master Yoda was returning from Kashyyyk, expecting flames, fallen clones, and the echo of blaster fire in the halls. Instead, when the ramp lowered, he found a temple still standing, but an order on its knees in a different way. Not destroyed. Shaken. The corridors were crowded, not with troopers, but with healers, senators, and frightened younglings clinging to knights who no longer pretended to be unbreakable. Anakin's duel in Palpatine's office, the Chancellor's arrest, the public revelation of a Sith Lord at the heart of the Republic. All of it hung in the air, like residual lightning after a storm. In this moment, Yoda felt the weight of it pressing down on his small shoulders, heavier than any battle on Kashyyyk. In the council chamber, the chairs were the same, the view the same. But the faces around Yoda's own seat carried new cracks. Mace's jaw was tight. Plo Koon's calm was frayed. Even Anakin's eyes, standing at the center, were no longer simply defiant. They were asking whether the council deserved the loyalty it had nearly lost. Yoda listened as reports poured in, as recordings of Palpatine's Sith confession played, as the story of that office, of the moment the chosen one made a different choice, was laid bare. Then, instead of defending the council, Yoda did something that stunned them more than any revelation about the Sith. He admitted they had failed. Failed to sense the darkness in plain sight. Failed by clinging to a prophecy instead of to living beings. Failed by retreating into dogma while the galaxy bled. Each word was slow, deliberate, like a blade being set down on the floor. The fate of the Jedi, he said, had come so close to ending, not because the Sith were strong, but because the Jedi had been blind. Anakin spoke of change, of families, of attachment, of a code that had almost driven him into Palpatine's arms. Once, Yoda would have simply warned of fear and loss. Now he nodded. Attachment, he said, was not the enemy. Possession was. Love was not the path to the dark, but the refusal to let go of control. All he had to do, in this moment, was choose to trust the very knight who had exposed the Sith. He made a choice, to support Anakin's reforms, carefully but openly. Training shifted. Younglings were led out of the temple into the streets of Coruscant, into refugee districts still scarred by the war. Padawans served in hospitals and farms, learning the faces behind the holonews reports. Meditation drills no longer focused only on distant serenity, but on the living force, on the currents of emotion, on empathy, on listening before acting. Knights practiced sensing pain, not to avoid it, but to understand it. There was a quiet pattern, interrupt in the temple's daily rhythm. Sparring sessions were followed by guided conversations about fear and desire. Archives classes included the failures of the Order, not just its triumphs. Even discussions of the Sith changed. Instead of treating them as distant monsters, Yoda framed them as a warning of what happened when power was sought without connection. Privately, Yoda stood at the temple balcony, feeling the city's pulse. Dagobah's mists called to his instincts for retreat, for exile, for penance. But now he saw that fleeing would only repeat the same mistake, abandoning the galaxy when it needed the Jedi's light most. The Order would either evolve in the open or die in the shadows. So he chose to remain at the heart of galactic affairs, reshaping the spiritual backbone of the Jedi, determined that when the next darkness rose, it would find an Order no longer hiding from the living force, but standing right where it wanted him, among the people it served. No Vader, no Inquisitors, a galaxy with more Jedi. So when the Senate's cheers finally faded and the banners of war came down, the galaxy did not wake up to an empty temple or a silent Order. It woke up to thousands of Jedi still breathing, still standing, and for the first time in generations, forced to look at themselves without a Sith's shadow directing their every move. Across the Republic, transports touched down on scarred worlds. Jedi stepped out of gunships not as hunted traitors, but as exhausted guardians returning from a war that had nearly twisted them into something else. Many were battle-weary, their eyes older than their faces, their faith shaken by the revelation that the entire conflict had been a Sith engine, built to grind the galaxy into submission. In this moment, every scar on their armor felt like a reminder of how close the Chosen One and the Council had come to becoming tools of that engine. Anakin felt it more sharply than most, as reports of the inhibitor chips and the Hidden Order 66 protocol spread through the temple archives. He walked the halls with a quiet, simmering anger. All he had to do, he told himself, was keep pushing the Order away from blind obedience, away from the kind of rigid trust that had almost handed the fate of the Jedi to a single voice in the Chancellor's office. He made a choice. The Jedi would never again be one building, one council, one easy target. Under his influence, and with Yoda and Obi-Wan's blessing, the Jedi began to decentralize. New enclaves rose on Naboo, Kashyyyk, Onderon, and even Mandalore, each shaped by the world around it. The Coruscant Temple remained a spiritual heart, but it was no longer a single point of failure waiting for clone legions or Sith lightning. Temples in forests, in cities, in quiet mountain valleys, created a web of presence that tied the Order directly into the lives of the people it served. Without Vader, without Inquisitors stalking the shadows, the hunt for Force sensitives changed entirely. There were no black-armored silhouettes tearing children from their homes, no secret academies built on fear. Jedi ships arrived openly, speaking with families, inviting the gifted to train in the light. Younglings from the Outer Rim walked into sunlit courtyards instead of prison cells, their first memory of a lightsaber, a calm training blade, not an executioner's weapon, but more light meant more shadows at the edges. With so many Jedi surviving, and so many enclaves interpreting the code through different cultures, disagreements sharpened. Some masters embraced attachment in limited forms, pointing to Anakin and Padme as proof that love, tempered by discipline, could strengthen a Jedi. Others clung to the old ascetic path, warning that the Sith had always risen from passion turned inward. Small splinter groups formed, not Sith, but convinced that the Central Council no longer understood the living force on their distant worlds. The galaxy was brighter, undeniably. More Jedi on more worlds meant fewer worlds facing darkness alone. Yet it was also more complex, more unpredictable. An Order becoming a diverse, sometimes fractious community instead of a single monolithic wall against the night. And in the depths of a Mandalorian vault, one mutilated Sith listened to those distant, conflicting currents in the Force. and began to understand exactly how to turn that new diversity into the crack he needed. The hidden Sith question: does darkness truly die? Across the galaxy, the Force did not fall silent just because a single Sith Lord was locked in Durasteel and Beskar. In this moment, the Mandalorian Vault was only a dam, not the end of the river. The fate of the Sith tradition, of that ancient hunger for power, still pulsed in the dark, like a buried ember. For 1,000 years, the rule of two had kept that ember alive, master and apprentice, one to crave power, one to hoard it. Names changed, empires rose and fell, but the chain never truly broke. Bane, Zana, Tenebrous, Plagueis, Sidious, each convinced they had the galaxy right where he wanted him. Each certain the chosen one of the Sith would finally eclipse the Jedi. Palpatine was only the latest link, not the first, and in his silence he clung to that history like armor. Even before his capture, he had planned for absence. Contingencies inside contingencies. A Clark's son on Jakku, whose sharp eyes missed nothing. A quiet boy watching troop drills, learning how fear moved crowds. Someone like Gallius Rax, or another forgotten orphan, already marked by a passing glance from a hooded senator. All he had to do was be noticed, be useful, be ruthless. Somewhere in the Outer Rim, a transport schedule changed, a scholarship was granted, a child was moved closer to the shadow of Coruscant without ever knowing why. But apprentices were not the only threat. The Sith did not just live in masters and students. They lived in holocrons sealed beneath obsidian floors, in temples half swallowed by sand, in worlds where the very wind tasted of ash and old lightning. Malachor, Korriban, Moraband, places where a wandering mind could touch a thought that was not its own. Even if the line of the rule of two snapped here, the echo of 1,000 years of whispered teachings waited for the next vulnerable soul. Anakin understood that more than anyone. He had stood on the edge once, blade humming in a chancellor's office, convinced that one terrible choice could save everything. Now, older, more self-aware, he walked through the galaxy like a man listening for a storm beneath clear skies. He made a choice to hunt down Sith relics, to lead teams of Jedi and Mandalorians into forgotten catacombs, to stand in front of cracked holocrons and feel the way they pulled at his anger, his fear, his love. When younger knights shuddered at the voices inside those crystals, Anakin did not turn away. He remembered Palpatine's stories, the tragedy of Plagueis, the seduction of secret power. He remembered how close he had come to becoming the weapon that ended the Jedi. The chosen one now became their shield, insisting that no child, no senator, no restless Padawan would face that whispering darkness alone. And still, questions lingered in the Force. In a galaxy where the Jedi were stronger, more numerous, more compassionate, did the Sith simply die or adapt? Did the rule of two give way to scattered cults, masked acolytes and fanatics bound not by patience but by raw devotion to the dark? Or had the light finally gained a lasting advantage, pushing the darkness so far into the cracks that it could only survive as poison instead of an empire? Far below Mandalore, a mutilated Sith Lord listened to that question and smiled behind his muzzle, already shaping the answer. A different, original trilogy. If there's no empire to rebel against the answer, Palpatine was shaping in that cell would never be an empire of stormtroopers and Death Stars. It would be something quieter, slower, more insidious. Because without his coup, without Order 66, the Republic survived. And that meant the next great conflict of the galaxy would not be rebels against an emperor, but senators against senators, ideals against fear, reformists against hardliners. There was no rebel alliance hiding in shadow bases, no scattered cells praying for a farm boy to fire a perfect shot. Instead, the old Senate rot simply changed shape. Former separatist worlds demanded autonomy. Core world blocks clung to privilege, and every faction claimed to defend democracy while sharpening knives under the table. In this moment, the fate of the Republic hinged not on a single trench run, but on 1,000 procedural votes, emergency bills, and whispered coalitions formed in dim committee rooms. Into that storm walked Luke and Leia Skywalker, not as naive dreamers, but as trained Jedi Knights in their 20s, already veterans of negotiation missions and border disputes. Leia, Obi-Wan's pupil, moved through the Senate corridors with calm precision, her eyes reading the subtle shifts of posture and breath that betrayed a lie long before a speech ended. Luke, Ahsoka's student, carried his blade at his hip, but his restlessness in his chest, a longing for clarity the Senate could never give. Their battlefield was not a Death Star hangar. It was the Chancellor's office, committee hearings, emergency security councils where admirals and corporate magnates argued over fleets and trade routes. Leia drafted oversight charters for the clones who had once been tools of a Sith, now struggling to find purpose in peacetime. Luke flew escort for relief convoys into regions still scarred by the Clone Wars, facing pirates, mercenaries, and something new. Regional warlords who had tasted independence and would not surrender it. But the most dangerous enemies were not always those with obvious armies. War profiteers, enriched by the chaos Sidious engineered, bought influence block by block, turning reconstruction contracts into private fiefdoms. A coalition of worlds, tired of Jedi intervention, began to whisper that the Order itself was the problem, that any group claiming to serve the light while carrying weapons for the state was one step away from tyranny. All they needed was a spark. Here the Skywalker twins began to diverge. Leia believed that the Chosen One's legacy was institutions that could outlast any single hero, that all he had to do now was defend the rules that kept power accountable. She pushed for transparency, civilian oversight of the Jedi, anti-corruption tribunals that could drag even core world giants into the light. Luke felt the Force pulling elsewhere. He saw visions of fractures the Senate could not mend, of worlds slipping away while committees debated wording. He made a choice, again and again, to leave the chamber and step onto a starship. Direct action. Mediation on the front lines. Spiritual quests into forgotten Jedi enclaves to understand why the Order had failed before and why the Sith kept returning in new masks. Leia stayed, building alliances with Padme, with Mon Mothma, with Bail, trying to keep the center from tearing itself apart. Then came the pattern no one wanted to recognize. Local defense pacts arming beyond their mandates, anti-Jedi riots on worlds that had once begged for protection, warlords offering stability where the Senate only offered debate. This original trilogy was not a story about overthrowing a visible tyrant standing on a throne of steel. It was about preventing a fragile, reformed democracy from collapsing under its own contradictions, while a silenced Sith Lord waited, patient, for the cracks to widen just enough for his lightning to slip through. And somewhere beneath Mandalore, Palpatine listened to the reports that reached his vault and realized the galaxy was drifting right where he wanted it. Luke without a father to redeem. A new kind of hero's journey. And somewhere far above that Mandalorian vault, another kind of storm was forming. Not in the Senate, not in the courts. In the heart of a boy who had grown up knowing exactly who his father was. Luke Skywalker never stared at twin suns, wondering who his parents might be. He watched real lightning dance across Naboo's summer skies from the balcony of a lake retreat, a little hand wrapped around a calloused metal one, as Anakin pointed to the clouds and quietly explained how the Force flowed through every drop of rain. Luke's longing was not for a face he had never seen. His longing was to catch up, to live up, to be worthy of the legend sitting beside him. By the time he reached the Jedi Temple at 13, the stories were already everywhere. The Chosen One who ended the Clone Wars. The Jedi who unmasked a Sith Lord Chancellor and changed the fate of the Republic, of the Jedi, of the galaxy. Every sparring match Luke entered, every meditation session he sat through, carried the weight of that name. All he had to do, the Masters said, was trust the Force as his father had in that office on Coruscant. But in this moment, trust felt like a command, not a comfort. Luke's blade work, honed under Ahsoka's relentless drills, outpaced most nights before his trials. His connection to the Force flared hot and immediate, answering his will faster than his patience could keep up. Whether Luke of canon wrestled with anger at an absent father and the shadow of Vader's crimes, this Luke wrestled with something quieter and more corrosive, the fear of disappointing a family that had never left him. He pushed harder, longer hours in the training rooms, riskier exercises in the archives, where forbidden histories whispered of Jedi who fell, and of one who almost did. Anakin did not hide those records. He requested them, sat with his son in a dim, hollow library as blue light flickered across their faces, and described, in careful detail, the day he had nearly become a Sith. He spoke of Palpatine's office, of Mace's raised blade, of the split second where rage and fear had almost ruled him. He made a choice, Anakin said, to trust the Order instead of his terror. His voice did not tremble. His eyes did. Anakin became both mentor and warning. He walked Luke through every misstep, every manipulation, turning his almost fall into a living lesson instead of a buried shame. It made Luke proud. It made Luke safe. It also made Luke hesitate. How could his own instincts ever be trusted when set against the man who had already passed the ultimate test? So his primary struggle turned inward. Impatience when missions were reassigned to Leia. Overconfidence when his power solved problems before his wisdom could question them. A quiet terror that one reckless decision might not just stain his name, but crack the foundation his father had bled to repair. The Order called this transparency a new strength. Yet in the Force, subtle currents began to twist. Was Luke becoming a more balanced Jedi because every shadow had been named? Or was the constant presence of Anakin's legend delaying the moment he would step beyond it and find his own path? Far below, in the Mandalorian vault, a chained Sith Lord felt that hesitation, like a change in pressure, and turned his ruined face toward the ceiling, as if listening for the first hairline fracture in Skywalker confidence. Leia, not Luke, the political chosen one. Far above that buried cell, another presence was rising that Sidious could not quite predict. In the bright, echoing halls of the restored Senate, a young woman in white stood at the center podium, dark eyes steady as hundreds of hovering pods turned toward her. Leia Organa, Skywalker of Alderaan, Senator, Padawan, daughter of the man once called the Chosen One. From the moment she arrived on Coruscant as a teenager, her path had been a deliberate echo of Padme's. and a quiet answer to Anakin's fears. Bail and Padme guided her through committee chambers and backroom negotiations, teaching her procedure and patience. Obi-Wan and Ahsoka guided her through the Jedi Temple, teaching her to listen to the Force in every breath, every heartbeat in the room. Her lightsaber practice ended, and an hour later, she would be in a Senate hearing, the same calm focus carrying from one arena to the other. In this moment, Leia embodied something new. Not a Jedi detached from politics, not a senator ignorant of the Force, but a bridge. She learned to extend her senses in quiet ripples during debates, tasting flashes of fear, pride, and concealed anger. She could feel when a delegate's voice shook, not from outrage, but from guilt. All she had to do was tilt a question, soften a phrase, and a vote that might have spiraled into open conflict bent instead toward compromise. There were days Anakin watched from the Chancellor's balcony, arms folded, wrestling with his own instincts. When a border crisis flared along old separatist routes, his first thought was still deployment, presence, the visible blade of the Jedi to deter violence. Leia, standing at the central podium, argued for joint investigation teams, transparent hearings, and equal Jedi oversight on both sides. He made a choice to support her, but not without friction. Their arguments in private were fierce. Anakin's voice would harden as he spoke of how quickly order could crumble, how the Sith had once turned procedure into a weapon. Leia's reply was just as intense, Padme's idealism sharpened by Jedi training. If the Order answered every tension with ships and sabers, if the Republic allowed fear to shortcut process, then the fate of this new era would be the same as the last. Different uniforms, same collapse. Slowly, other Jedi began to orbit her. Younger knights and Padawans came to her office before reporting to the Council, admitting failures, doubts, even small abuses of authority. Leia insisted those reports reach the archives and the High Council, no matter how uncomfortable. She pushed for rotating audits of Jedi deployments, for public summaries of major operations. She refused to let the Order sink back into secrecy. In council sessions, Anakin sometimes felt cornered, right where he wanted him turned against him, as Leia calmly questioned why certain missions were classified, why certain worlds saw only Jedi and never mediators. Yet beneath the sting, there was pride. She was the moral center of this new generation, the one person even veteran masters hesitated to dismiss, as old wounds reopened along the rim and whispers of Sith artifacts and dark cults began to surface. It was Leia's steady presence that kept the Senate from fracturing along ancient lines. In a very real, political sense, many began to speak of her as the true chosen one, not the warrior who ended the Sith, but the guardian who kept a wounded republic from tearing itself apart before the final shadow revealed itself. Anakin's midlife test, when peace becomes boring. But for Anakin, the era that followed Leia's rise felt strangely hollow. The great storms had passed. The galaxy was not healed, but it was quiet. Major wars were rare, skirmishes contained. The Jedi integrated into civic life as mediators, investigators, and quiet guardians instead of legendary generals. Anakin Skywalker found himself seated more often than standing. Council chambers on Coruscant, committee halls on Chandrila, reconstruction boards above worlds he had once liberated with a blazing blade. His hands, built for a lightsaber and starfighter controls, now hovered over data pads and legislation drafts. In this moment, the fate of sectors was decided not by duels, but by subclauses. He tried to embrace it. He attended every session, listened to economists, planetary governors, and young Jedi analysts who had never seen a battlefield. Yet every time a reform stalled in procedure, every time a vital anti-corruption measure was sent back to subcommittee, a familiar frustration coiled in his chest. All he had to do was lean on a few key senators, apply subtle pressure to a few nervous governors, and the gridlock would break. The temptation was not lightning and red blades. It was applause. Younger Jedi approached him in the temple corridors, their eyes wide, asking for guidance on how to vote in the new Jedi civic councils. Freshly elected politicians crossed the Senate floor just to be seen speaking with him. To them, Anakin was the chosen one who had ended the Sith, the man whose testimony had toppled a chancellor and saved the Jedi from extinction. Endorsements became requests. Requests became expectations. A single nod from Anakin could swing a planetary relief bill, redirect a fleet, make or break a candidate. Without meaning to, he became a kingmaker, right where he wanted him in every negotiation, every backroom compromise. The galaxy called it respect. To the Force, it felt like gravity bending around one man. Padme saw it first. In a quiet Naboo garden between sessions, she listened as Anakin vented about obstructionists and cowards. His voice sharpened when he spoke of simply overruling them with emergency authority. She reached for his mechanical hand and reminded him, softly but firmly, that another chancellor had once used endless emergencies to fix a broken republic. Obi-Wan was less gentle. Meeting Anakin in the temple's high spire, he pointed toward the city and spoke of Palpatine in his cell on Mandalore, still muzzled, still dangerous precisely because he had learned to rule hearts before he ruled fleets. Imposing order from above, Obi-Wan warned, even in the name of peace, echoed the same music the Sith had always played. Anakin listened. He made a choice, again, to pull back from the edge, to let some battles be lost in committee rather than won through pressure. But the tension remained. The war hero, who once saved the Order, now faced a quieter trial. A galaxy that no longer needed a warrior, yet still hung on his every word. He had avoided the dark side once. Now its shadow changed shape, whispering not of conquest, but of control. And as the next generation watched him, and as one restless son in particular searched for purpose, that shadow waited for a new place to fall. The new dark, a charismatic populist, rises. The shadow that waited did not wear a cloak or carry a red blade. It wore a senatorial sash. It spoke in measured tones. And in this moment, years after Anakin dragged the Republic back from the brink, that shadow finally stepped into the light. His name was Senator Darren Vostal. Mid-Rim born, Outer Rim elected, he rose not through bloodlines or ancient orders, but through crowded halls on overtaxed worlds that felt forgotten. He praised Bail Organa's reforms, honored Padme's memory in every speech, and then, with the same breath, asked how long the galaxy must live under the quiet rule of a single family and a single creed. Tal's words spread fast. On mining moons, where clone veterans struggled to find work, on agrarian worlds that had seen Jedi gunships once and senators never again. He did not call the Jedi monsters. He called them guardians who had forgotten to step aside. He played recordings of Anakin addressing the Senate, of Luke and Leia mediating disputes, then asked if any other citizens would ever be allowed such power over the fate of entire sectors. He framed it as simple civics. The Republic had almost fallen because one man gathered too much power in secret. Now, Tal argued, the Jedi and the Skywalkers held that same power in the open. All he had to do was hold up hollows of Anakin deflecting lightning in the war, of Luke training with a humming blue blade in the temple courts. And the contrast wrote itself. Warriors in an age that claimed to be at peace. In committee chambers on Coruscant, Tal's proposals slid onto the docket. Regional charters that barred Jedi intervention without planetary consent. Oversight boards that could veto council deployments. Quiet clauses that would, in practice, expel Jedi from entire subsectors that did not feel represented by them. Then he went further. On a packed Senate floor, lights dimmed for effect, Tal replayed the sealed verdict of Palpatine's trial. He paused on the moment the judges chose imprisonment over execution. He spoke of Mandalorian vaults, of the cost of guarding a single Sith for decades, and he asked why a traitor of that magnitude still drew breath. He did not say Anakin's name. He did not need to. Everyone knew who had stayed Mace Windu's hand. Everyone knew who had insisted on a trial. Tal let the silence accuse the Chosen One more loudly than any words. The message was clear. When the Jedi held life and death, they spared their own enemies and overruled the galaxy. Luke, Leia, and Anakin found themselves dragged into a debate they never wanted. Leia stood before oversight committees, explaining that the Jedi served at the Senate's request, not above it. Luke fielded pointed questions from young officers who admired his skill but feared his authority. Anakin, who had once begged for trust, now had to defend the order without sounding like a general demanding obedience. He made a choice in those hearings: calm over fire, service over pride. Yet even as he spoke, reports filtered in from the fringes. Remote colonies where citizens claimed to see visions after Tal's rallies. Unregistered adepts suddenly manifesting violent bursts of telekinesis during political riots. Dark whispers of robed figures stirring crowds, then vanishing before security arrived. Somewhere beyond the hyperlanes, something was amplifying fear, and as Tal's movement swelled, as the Senate edged towards stripping the Jedi of their reach, the first fragmented hollows arrived at the temple. Blurry images of crackling lightning in the hands of those who had never been trained. Echoes of the Sith, a new apprentice in the shadows. Those blurry hollows reached more than the Jedi. In a secure wing beneath the Mandalorian vault where Palpatine was entombed, a single senator watched the crackling frames on a private projector. His brow furrowed, his mind racing as the fate of public opinion shifted in real time. This was Senator Varric Tal's closest confidant, a sharp-eyed aide named Marek Dalen. Outwardly, Marek was the calm strategist behind Tal's populist surge. Inwardly, something colder had begun to stir. He requested a classified visit to the former Chancellor, arguing to security and to Organa's office that understanding the enemy's methods was the only way to protect the galaxy from another Sith. It sounded reasonable. It sounded cautious. It was exactly the pretext Palpatine had waited for. Inside the vault, the air was stale and metallic. Durasteel restraints pinned what remained of Darth Sidious. His face was mutilated, his mouth sealed by a cortosis muzzle, his hands bound in Mandalorian alloy to ground out any stray lightning. But his eyes were free, yellow, hungry. In this moment, as Marek stepped into the gloom, those eyes tracked him with surgical precision. The guards left them under layered surveillance fields. Marek spoke first, careful, rehearsed, telling the silent prisoner that the Jedi claimed victory, that the Republic had rebranded, that a new age of transparency had dawned. He said he wanted to study how a single Sith had twisted institutions, how lies had become law. All he had to do was listen, catalogue, and never believe. Palpatine answered without sound. The muzzle stayed locked, but the Force did not. Thin tendrils of thought slipped past cortosis and sensor grids like smoke through cracks. Images, half-truths. Jedi councils sitting in judgment over frightened children. Senators trading favors while systems starved. Anakin kneeling in the council chamber, denied the rank he had earned. Palpatine framed it all as proof, not of Sith evil, but of Jedi hypocrisy. He painted the dark side as a scalpel, not a blade at the throat of the galaxy. Power, he suggested, was only corruption when held by the old guard. In the hands of the people's champions, it could liberate. Marek felt the intrusion and thought he was resisting. Instead, he was being shaped. Palpatine had him right where he wanted him. When Marek emerged weeks later, nothing on the surface had changed. He still drafted Tal's speeches, still spoke of justice and accountability. But now, in crowded plazas, his presence carried a subtle weight. A gesture here, a glance there, and fear sharpened into anger. The Force moved through him in quiet pulses, nudging doubts, inflaming resentments, turning skepticism into hatred of every institution that stood in his way. He rejected the old rule of two as a relic of a dying Sith line. There would be no cloaked master and cowering apprentice. There would be movements, parties, hollow feeds. Marek stood in the light, a public figure, while in the shadows, he blended Sith techniques with targeted rhetoric, learning how a single whispered suggestion in the Force could turn a protest into a riot. The Jedi noticed the unrest, but not its source. With Palpatine caged and no Vader ever born, the Council believed that true Sith-level threats had passed. Anakin focused on training, on his children, on patrolling obvious flashpoints. Luke sparred, Leia mediated, and the Order watched the hollows of burning plazas as if they were only politics, not the echo of a dead emperor's will. By the time faint signatures of the dark side began to ripple through the temple's meditations, Marek's influence had already spread across sectors. This was no empire rising, no clear banner to rally against. It was an information war, a storm of ideological extremism, carried on waves of anger and subtle Force manipulation. The age of clones and open war was over. A new era was beginning instead, where the line between Jedi and Sith blurred, and the next great conflict would be fought not only with blades and lightning, but with stories, symbols, and the hearts of the very people Anakin had sworn to protect. Skywalkers versus Shadows. The next great conflict. Across the reformed Republic, something invisible began to scream, not with blasters or star destroyers, but with crowds, with chants, with a rising tide of fear that twisted the air itself. Luke felt it first on Chandrila. Standing at the edge of a political rally, his eyes scanned banners calling for stronger security, harsher borders, tighter control. The words were sharp, but the Force beneath them was sharper. Fear bled into anger, anger into a strange, synchronized certainty. In this moment, Luke realized the crowd was not just emotional. It was being tuned, like a weapon. Leia sensed the same current on Corellia. As a senator and Jedi, she listened to desperate workers speak about lost trade routes, vanished protections, forgotten promises. Their pain was real, but as a firebrand speaker took the stage, Leia felt something else coil around the assembly. Every doubt dimmed. Every grievance hardened. All he had to do was raise his hand, and the crowd's rage moved with him, as if pulled by an unseen blade. Anakin joined them in the temple's strategy chamber, the holofeeds replaying rally after rally. His jaw tightened. These faces, these trembling voices, they were not monsters. They were the same kind of people who had once looked to a supreme chancellor for salvation. The same kind of fear that had whispered to a young Jedi Knight about losing everything he loved. The Chosen One saw his own past vulnerability reflected back at him, multiplied across entire worlds. He made a choice. This time, he would not dismiss those fears as weakness, nor let a hidden Sith turn them into chains. The Skywalkers tracked the disturbances to a single presence that flickered in and out of focus, never staying long enough to be cornered. Until, on an outer rim moon hosting a unity summit, the presence stopped running. It wanted them there. It waited in the shadows of a half-finished amphitheater, right where he wanted him. The new dark side user did not ignite a blade first. He spoke. About order, about safety, about a republic that still failed the Forgotten Worlds. His power poured through the Force like cold lightning, not to kill, but to bind. He accused the Jedi of clinging to abstract light while real citizens suffered. Who gave them the right, he asked, to decide what balance looked like? Luke's answer was instinctive, defensive. The Jedi protected freedom. Leia's response cut deeper, acknowledging the Republic's failures, refusing to surrender democracy to fear. Anakin stepped between them, not as general, not as legend, but as a man who had once almost become the very thing he now faced. The debate became a duel of visions, each word matched by a shift in stance, each argument mirrored in the crackle of crossed blades. But the Jedi's new approach changed everything. They did not seek to simply cut him down or drag him in chains to a vault. Leia exposed his methods to the crowd, watching from the stands, peeling back the manipulation. Luke reached through the Force to steady the minds he had felt twisted, offering calm instead of command. Anakin spoke directly to the grievances being weaponized, promising inquiry, resources, representation. For a heartbeat, the dark side wavered. Then it retreated, not defeated, but diminished, slipping back into the cracks of the galaxy's unrest. The Skywalkers stood amid a shaken crowd that did not quite understand what had almost happened. In this moment, they understood something far more terrifying than a single Sith Lord. This new conflict would not end with one duel, one vault, one destroyed superweapon. The fate of the Republic, of the Jedi, of the galaxy, now depended on a sustained fight to keep the light side relevant in a galaxy that was changing faster than any council decree. The next war would be for stories, for trust, for the very meaning of order itself, and the Skywalkers had only just stepped onto that battlefield. Would the sequels even happen, rethinking the future era? The stories of the future would not be about ruins and ashes. They would be about a living republic that could still bleed. In this moment, after the galaxy gun's destruction, the question hanging over every council chamber and Senate hall was simple. What kind of darkness could rise next? Now that an empire had never fallen at all, without a shattered imperial regime, there were no scattered moths hoarding star destroyers in hidden shipyards, no clean line from imperial remnant to first order. Any new iron-fisted movement would not come from the outside. It would have to grow inside the Republic itself, out of fear, out of exhaustion, out of senators who decided that safety was worth more than freedom, and that the Jedi's light was too slow, too gentle, too uncertain. The Chosen One had stopped the birth of Darth Vader, but not the old reflexes of a galaxy that still craved control. Committees demanded stronger security forces. Regional coalitions whispered about independent fleets. Intelligence bureaus quietly expanded their reach. All he had to do was look at the reports on Bail Organa's desk to see it. The next authoritarian wave would not wear stormtrooper armor at first. It would wear senatorial robes. In the middle of that slow political storm, a child was born who, in another timeline, would have worn a mask. Ben Solo entered a galaxy where Leia Organa was not hiding her power, not burying her saber in the sand. She was a Jedi Knight and a senator, her eyes calm, her blade rarely drawn, but always present in the public mind. Han stood beside her, half in awe, half bewildered that the old myths had become family dinners. Ben grew up with Anakin's laughter, with Luke's quiet scars, with Leia's discipline. There was no secret legacy of Vader to be discovered in a ruined throne room. No shattering revelation that his bloodline was a lie. If a darkness ever called to him, it would not be the seduction of a dead empire's ghost, but the temptation to fix a living system that still failed worlds on the margins. He made a choice each day between his mother's patience and his grandfather's restless fire, and the future held its breath to see which side he would feed. Far beyond the core, another child listened to the Force in the wreckage of forgotten battlefields. Rey, born of a hidden strand of Palpatine's bloodline, did not have to wait for legends to return. The Jedi never vanished. Patrols of knights still visited frontier worlds. Archives remained open. The question was not whether she would be found, but how soon and by whom. In this altered history, Rey might be identified by a wandering Jedi archivist on Jakku before her 10th year, her raw power impossible to ignore. Her lineage, once a poison buried under decades of lies, would be confronted in the open in a quiet council chamber where Anakin and Ahsoka and Leia could look into her eyes and decide whether the granddaughter of the Sith who tried to consume the galaxy could be trusted with a blade of light. If a Starkiller level horror ever emerged, it would not be the formal flagship of a pseudo-empire. It would be a weapon built in the shadows by extremists who had lost faith in the Republic's slow reforms. A terrorist superweapon cobbled together from black market Kyber and stolen Clone Wars tech. A single system killer, not backed by a fleet, but by fanatics who believed that one catastrophic strike could force the galaxy to accept a new order. The fate of that future era would not revolve around resurrecting and defeating a dead empire. It would be about reforming a flawed but functioning republic before its own fear devoured it from within. About Jedi who had to become guardians of conscience as much as guardians of peace. The sequels of this timeline would still unfold. The names might even echo, but the true enemy would be harder to see, harder to strike, and far closer to home. And somewhere in a quiet cell deep beneath Mandalorian iron, an old Sith listened to those distant tremors in the Force and realized the galaxy was drifting exactly where he had always wanted it, right where he wanted him. The moral ledger: is the galaxy truly better without Vader? In this moment, the galaxy hangs between two kinds of scars. One is the clean, brutal wound of a tyrant's rise and fall. The other is the slower, quieter fracture of institutions that almost destroyed themselves. Anakin's choice has spared one, but not the other. On the surface, the ledger seems obvious. There is no Jedi purge, no blue-white lightning signal that the Order is hunted to extinction. The temple still stands, its halls full of younglings instead of smoke. There is no Death Star, no planet-killing beam fired in front of a cheering Imperial court. The Republic never hardens into a single, decades-long fascist regime under Palpatine's open rule. The fate of Alderaan, of entire worlds, is rewritten before a single superweapon can fire. Anakin, the chosen one who never falls, becomes proof that attachment can be guided instead of crushed. Padme lives, Luke and Leia grow up with their father's hand on their shoulders and their mother's voice in the Senate. The Jedi adapt, soften, reform. For millions across the galaxy, that means fewer mass graves, fewer worlds turned to ash, fewer children watching star destroyers eclipse their suns. But the trade-offs cut deep. Palpatine is still alive, muzzled, chained, buried under Mandalorian iron. Yet his presence presses against the edge of consciousness, like a nightmare half remembered. Without the clear horror of an empire, his influence mutates instead of ending. Corrupt governors, secret cults, masked extremists who quote old Sith doctrine but never call themselves Sith. The enemy is no longer a single throne on Coruscant. It is 1,000 shadows in 1,000 systems. In canon, Darth Vader's armor becomes a symbol of absolute evil, and his final act becomes something else entirely. A broken father, staring into his son's eyes, choosing the light as he hurls a Sith Lord into the abyss. That story tells the galaxy that even the worst monster can turn back. Here, that myth never exists. Anakin never wears the mask, never becomes the terror whispered about in Outer Rim bunkers. He made a choice earlier, cleaner, less visible to ordinary citizens. The lesson is quieter. Prevent the fall instead of redeeming the fallen. The psychological impact is different. There is no single evil empire defeated moment for holodramas to replay. Instead, senators and citizens live with the knowledge that their own courts, their own Jedi, almost handed everything to a Sith without a single star destroyer in the sky. Trust erodes not in a blaze of rebellion, but in a slow, uneasy awareness that the danger was always inside the chamber, not marching in from outside. So is this galaxy better? Safer in some ways. The body count is lower, the wars less catastrophic, the stars less often turned into grave markers, but it is more fragile in others. Its stories less mythic, its villains less obvious, its heroes forced to fight in courts and councils instead of on clean, decisive battlefields. All he had to do was stop one man from becoming Vader, and he did. The cost is a galaxy that trades one blazing legend of fall and redemption for a long, uncertain struggle against corruption without a face. Whether that is truly better depends on what this galaxy values more: fewer apocalyptic wars, or the clarity of a monster to defeat. And somewhere beneath Mandalorian metal, a pair of yellow eyes stay closed, listening, waiting for that fragility to crack. Anakin's legacy rewritten, from monster to cautionary hero. Across the galaxy, the name Darth Vader never takes root. There is no towering black silhouette, no mechanical breathing stalking rebel corridors, no children whispering about the monster in the dark. Instead, holos across 1,000 worlds replay a different image. A young Jedi in dark robes stepping between Mace Windu and a cornered Chancellor, blade raised not in betrayal, but in restraint. In this moment, history itself split. In classrooms on Chandrila, in temple creches on Coruscant, instructors freeze the frame right there. Anakin's face tense, Mace's amethyst blade at Sidious's throat, lightning scars still smoking in the walls. The narration always says the same thing. The fate of the Republic rested on a single choice. Then the dramatized version plays. Mace is more rigid, Sidious more grotesque, Anakin more flawless, his voice steady as he demands a lawful trial. In some holodramas, He disarms Sidious in one perfect move. In others, he single-handedly blocks a final storm of lightning that would have killed the entire council. The real recording is messier. Anakin's voice cracks. Mace hesitates. Sidious almost has them right where he wanted them before clone reinforcements and Jedi Masters burst into the office. But over the decades, the story smooths. The Senate's official history makes Anakin the ideal Jedi guardian of democracy. Temple archives emphasize that he made a choice against fear and against the easy promise of power. Popular holodramas turn him into the chosen one who saw through the Sith and saved everything. Anakin himself hates those versions. Sitting in a quiet briefing room, watching a new dramatization with Luke and Leia, he feels his stomach tighten as a perfect holographic Anakin delivers a calm speech about justice. The real memory is sweat, panic, the echo of Padmé's voice, and a heartbeat away from disaster. He knows how close he came to believing that necessary evil speech. His fear is simple, that the galaxy will forget how thin that line was, and remember only the hero, not the almost. So he turns the myth against itself, with his own children, and with every youngling who looks at him with shining eyes. He starts in the same place, the worst thoughts he ever had. He speaks slowly about the nights he imagined overthrowing corrupt senators, about how the promise of just a little darkness sounded reasonable, even kind. All he had to do, the Sith whispered, was bend the rules once. He tells them that in this moment, in that office, those whispers were louder than any lightning. He walks training halls with Ahsoka and Obi-Wan, stopping duels mid-swing when anger flares. He talks about attachment without pretending it is weakness, about loving Padmé and still almost losing her to his own fear. For Luke, restless and fascinated by forbidden history, Anakin turns his near fall into a mirror, power without humility, destiny without discipline. For Leia, already a diplomat, he frames it as a warning about believing that institutions or titles make anyone incorruptible. Over time, Anakin's legacy becomes less a statue and more a question asked in every council debate. When masters argue about stricter codes or looser ties to the Senate, someone always invokes that office on Coruscant, that blade, that choice. Was Mace right to strike? Was Anakin right to stop him? There is no single answer, only an evolving conversation that refuses to let the Order forget how close it came to birthing its own destroyer. In the end, Anakin is remembered not as a monster defeated, but as a cautionary hero still watching from the archives. A living reminder that the line between savior and destroyer is thinner than anyone wants to admit, and that the next chosen one might not choose as well. The Jedi's new code, from detachment to responsible love. So the archives keep Anakin's near fall under lock and key, but the code itself is no longer hidden at all. It is read aloud in the temple halls, argued over in meditation gardens, etched into stone not as a verdict, but as a question. The Jedi are still guardians of peace, but the words that shape them have changed. Once, the code demanded there be no attachments, no fear, no passion. It treated love like a crack in the wall, something the Sith could pour lightning through. Now, line by line, masters rewrite it in the light of Anakin's story. Attachment is no longer forbidden. Possession is. Love is not a crime. Secrecy is. A Jedi may care deeply, but must never own, never control, never cling so tightly that the fate of another person becomes the only thing that matters. In the main training hall, this new code is not just recited, it is lived. Younglings sit in a circle around Ahsoka, around Obi-Wan, around masters who watched Anakin stand on the edge and step back. A boy admits he is terrified his clone battalion will die without him. A girl confesses she dreams of a family on her homeworld. Instead of being shamed into silence, they are guided. Their masters ask them where care ends and control begins, where compassion becomes obsession, where the chosen one almost lost himself. In this moment, the Order builds guardrails Anakin never had. There are healers whose only duty is counseling, not combat. There are peer circles where knights speak of nightmares, of anger, of the quiet pull toward more power. Clear protocols are carved into the code itself. When a Jedi feels the dark whisper of possession, they step back from command, surrender their blade for a time, sit with a council of 3 who have studied the Sith and survived their temptations. Not everyone accepts this gently. In high balconies above the training floor, traditionalists watch and frown. To them, this softer language sounds like surrender. They remember the old wars, the old clarity, when a Jedi was a warrior monk who cut away everything but duty. They argue that Anakin's story proves attachment is too dangerous, that all he had to do was follow the original code, and the galaxy would never have come so close to the brink. But now those arguments are spoken in the open council, not muttered in corridors. Debates over doctrine become a normal, almost ritual part of Jedi life. One master invokes Yoda, another invokes Anakin, a third warns that rigidity is its own path to ruin. No single voice has it right where he wanted him. No single answer rules them all. Slowly, the Order shifts. Less a uniform brotherhood, more a diverse spiritual community, scattered across the galaxy in temples, enclaves, and embassies, still flawed, still capable of failure, but far more resilient against the kind of all-or-nothing fall that once nearly remade the fate of the Republic in one man's despair. And as this living code evolves, one student in particular listens more closely than the rest, turning every word about attachment, power, and destiny over in his mind. What we lose, without the tragedy, the power of the original story, that students' eyes linger on every warning about pride, fear, and forbidden power. And in this moment, the story circles back to the path that was not taken, the path where the chosen one did fall, the path where Darth Vader was born in fire and screaming metal, and the fate of the Republic, the Jedi, and the galaxy was nearly sealed by one broken man's despair. In the original timeline, Anakin's fall is not just a twist. It is the spine of the saga. A slave boy who wanted to help everyone becomes the iron fist that chokes entire systems into submission. And then, at the very end, he made a choice to throw that power away for his son. Hubris, love, terror of loss, and the faint, flickering belief that forgiveness might still exist, all collide behind a black mask and burning yellow eyes. Without that descent into the armor, something immense is missing. The image of Vader striding through smoke, blade ignited, is more than spectacle. It is a living warning of what happens when a Jedi turns every wound into entitlement, every fear into rage, every plea for help into a demand for control. Removing Vader removes the symbol that even the worst monster in the room was once a frightened boy reaching for a hand in the dark. In that throne room above Endor, the Sith Lord has his son right where he wanted him. Lightning tears across the air. Luke writhes, and all he had to do to end the pain is surrender to hate. Instead, the son refuses. The father finally sees. In this moment, the saga says something devastating and beautiful. Even after atrocities, even after worlds burn a single selfless act can still matter. Not to erase the horror, but to end its reign. This alternate timeline trades that brutal clarity for something gentler. No empire, no galaxy ruled by fear, no children whispering Darth Vader's name as a nightmare. The contrast between white-armored stormtroopers and ragged rebel cells, between a suffocating imperial march and the fragile hope of a stolen transmission, is gone. The moral landscape here is more nuanced, more humane, but less starkly satisfying than watching a tiny band of rebels stand against an obvious, towering evil. Yet stories like this have their own quiet power. They do not exist to replace the canon that burned these images into history. They turn the tale on its side, exposing new angles, so the original choices and consequences can be felt even more sharply. By seeing what is spared, the cost of what was lost becomes clearer. Anakin not falling gives this galaxy a safer path, a slower healing, a kinder Jedi order. Anakin falling and rising again gives a myth that cuts straight to the heart of what it means to be broken, and to choose, at the very end, to stand in the light. Zooming back to the ledge, how 1 second changed everything. So to feel the weight of this gentler future, the story has to step back into the storm, back into that office high above Coruscant, where glass lies in shards, where the sky is burning with lightning, and where the fate of the Republic hangs on a single breath in Anakin Skywalker's chest. Mace Windu's blade is at Sidious's throat. The Chancellor's face is twisted, melted by his own reflected lightning. Outside, rain hammers the broken window, each drop a drumbeat counting down Anakin's remaining seconds. His eyes flick from the purple blade to the crumpled Sith to the endless city below. In this moment, everything in his life is compressed into the space between two heartbeats. In canon, fear wins. Fear of Padmé's death, fear of losing power, fear of being helpless again, like that boy on Tatooine. All he had to do was move, and he cut down Mace Windu, surrendered himself to a new master, and the Chosen One became the darkest Jedi the galaxy had ever seen. The next commands were simple. Execute Order 66. Burn the temple. Kneel before the new emperor. But here, the shift is tiny, almost invisible. Anakin is not suddenly fearless. His hands still shake. His thoughts still race. The difference is where his love points. Not inward, clutching, possessive. Outward, protective. He looks at Mace and does not see an obstacle to Padmé. He sees a guardian standing between the Sith and everyone he loves. He made a choice. The same step forward, the same ignited blade, but a different target. Blue meets red instead of purple. Sidious finds his own trap turned against him, his lightning thrown back, his saber sent skittering across the floor. Mace does not fall. The Sith does. From that single second, the montage explodes. No Order 66 code ripples through the clones. The temple lights stay on. Younglings wake to training, not blaster fire. On Naboo, Padmé's hand does not slip from a medical droid's grasp. She lives to hold her children, to watch Luke and Leia run through sunlit fields, instead of becoming symbols carved on memorials. The Jedi Council stands bruised but breathing, forced to confront its failures without being wiped away. Trials replace executions. Palpatine sits in chains instead of on a throne, sealed in a Mandalorian vault with his lightning silenced and his voice stolen behind Durasteel and Beskar. The Republic does not die in thunder. It reforms in debate, in hard compromises, in the steady work of those Anakin saved. Against this, the canon path looks even starker. The same office, the same storm, a different angle of a single blade, and suddenly Mace Windu is hurled into the night. The temple burns, the clones turn, Darth Vader rises, and for decades the galaxy drowns in the shadow of one man's surrender. This is the knife-edge Star Wars always returns to. One person, one room, one breath. The fate of the Jedi, of the Republic, of generations not yet born, all balanced on a choice that could have gone either way. And somewhere, in every version of the story, Anakin is still standing in that office, staring through the rain, deciding which kind of love will guide his hand next. Your turn. Which moment would you change? Across the saga, those knife edges are everywhere. The council chamber on Coruscant, where Anakin stands in the center of the room, as 12 robed figures question his loyalty. A lonely hangar on Mandalore, where Ahsoka Tano waits for a council that never truly listens. A landing platform on Mustafar, where Padme's tears mix with volcanic ash, as Anakin's eyes burn yellow with betrayal. In this moment, each scene holds the same silent question. What happens if one sentence changes? One hand reaches out instead of pulling away. One master remembers that the chosen one is still just a frightened man. If the Jedi Council had trusted Anakin fully, granted him the rank of master, invited him into their fears instead of locking him out, would the fate of the Order have truly shifted? Or would his hunger for power have simply found another path? On Coruscant, Ahsoka's trial becomes another fracture point. Imagine a council that defends her publicly, that challenges Tarkin, that believes Anakin's instincts instead of doubting them. In one version, she never walks away, and Anakin never learns that the Jedi can abandon the innocent. In another, the same doubts remain, only buried deeper, waiting to explode years later when Palpatine whispers about hypocrisy in the dark. On Mustafar, Padme's shuttle ramp lowers into the heat. All he had to do was listen. If Anakin drops his blade, falls to his knees, and admits his terror instead of his triumph, then Obi-Wan never has to step from the shadows with a broken heart. But even then, would the Sith Lord in the Chancellor's office simply find another wound to press, another nightmare to promise he can heal? Some divergences reach even further back. The Theed power generator, Maul's red blade, Qui-Gon's last breath. If Obi-Wan falls instead, and Maul walks away believing he has destroyed the apprentice, how does that reshape the boy from Tatooine? Does Anakin become the student of a living Qui-Gon, guided by compassion instead of council politics? Or does a longer leash only make the final break more devastating when he finally turns against the Jedi? And beyond Anakin, the galaxy fractures into 1,000 possible lines. What if Maul actually kills Obi-Wan on Naboo and survives to stalk the shadows of the Republic as its secret executioner? What if Count Dooku, blade at his throat in the Invisible Hands hangar, feels Anakin's rage and, instead of goading it, surrenders to the light, exposing Sidious decades early? What if, on Cloud City, Luke takes his father's hand and steps into the abyss as an apprentice of the Sith, long before Palpatine ever sets eyes on him? Each of those changes becomes its own episode 3, its own episode 4. Entire wars end sooner or burn longer. Entire bloodlines rise or vanish. But at the center, it is always the same pattern. One person, one room, one breath. He made a choice, or failed to, and history bent around it. This story is only one path among many. One answer to the question of what happens when Anakin stays Jedi and the Sith adapt. The next path waits in the next small decision, in the next hand offered or refused. and the galaxy is wide enough to hold them all without erasing the tale that began it. Word count checkpoint. The timeline is about to fracture again into a threat older than Anakin and more patient than any council. From head canon to holocron, how to think like a Star Wars writer. In this moment between paths, the story pulls back, not to leave the galaxy behind, but to show how its fate can be rebuilt from a single altered heartbeat in one chancellor's office. The method is simple on the surface. First, a clear fracture line is chosen. Anakin in front of the shattered window, Mace's purple blade at Sidious's throat, lightning still crawling across the desk. All he had to do was turn, ignite, and strike a different target. That is the divergence. Everything that follows is chained to that one decision, to the instant he made a choice that broke from the known tale. From there, reactions are traced, not results. Mace does not vanish into a summary. He staggers back into the council chamber, burned but alive, demanding emergency powers to arrest a Sith Lord. Obi-Wan hears and feels a tremor through the Force, torn between frontline duty and the friend who just exposed the Chancellor. Padme watches the holonet as the man who promised peace is dragged in binders past screaming reporters. Each response is mapped step by step, before the Senate falls, before any new order rises. Character psychology is the compass. Anakin's fear of losing Padme never disappears. It bends his choices, even as a Jedi, toward aggressive protection and dangerous mercy. Padme's idealism does not let her cheer for executions, so the demand for a lawful trial becomes the bridge that keeps Anakin in the light and still drags Palpatine into the open. Obi-Wan's sense of duty keeps him within the council, even when he doubts it, so his support for reform is cautious, incremental. And in the shadows of a Mandalorian vault, Palpatine's cunning survives in narrowed eyes and muffled words, waiting for the next Skywalker to reach for forbidden power. To keep the galaxy solid beneath all of this, the rules of the universe are honored. The inhibitor chips that enabled Order 66 still exist. If the voice that triggers them is silenced, the clones do not suddenly become different men. They become a powder keg without a match. Senate procedure still requires committees, votes, emergency sessions. Bail Organa cannot simply declare himself Chancellor by hope alone. Jedi law still warns about attachment, prophecy, and the Chosen One. So any softened code must wrestle with thousands of years of fear and tradition. The smallest changes are treated as sparks. A single line in that office, Anakin insisting he stands trial, forces Mace to choose restraint, forces Palpatine to reveal a different layer of power, forces the Senate to confront its own blindness. From there, the questions expand. Who hears about this? Who benefits? Who loses? Who hides? Ahsoka returning to testify against the council shifts public trust. Rex learning about the chips before they fire changes the clones' loyalty. One quiet conversation in Padme's apartment can redirect the arc of an entire campaign. Across the galaxy, countless minds are already building such paths. In stories, in games, in private holocrons of imagination. Those who shape them keep their timelines coherent by following emotion first and politics second, by letting every new victory cost something, and by refusing to grant the heroes perfect foresight. The result is not a cleaner galaxy, but a truer one, where the same rules hold and only the choices differ. And somewhere ahead, those choices will bring another Skywalker to the edge of a different abyss, right where a waiting Sith Lord always wanted him. The next section steps into that shadow, Closing the holocron, what this timeline tells us about ours. That shadow hanging over the next Skywalker says something uncomfortable about both timelines. It shows that even when the Sith are defeated in open battle, the conditions that birthed them do not vanish overnight. Institutions linger. Habits of fear and secrecy linger. And in this moment, the difference is not a cleaner galaxy, but a different kind of test. Anakin's story in this branch began with a single refusal. He stood in Palpatine's office, blade lit, lightning flashing off the shattered transparasteel, and he made a choice that neither redeemed nor damned the Jedi in one stroke. All he had to do was kill a helpless Sith and end the war in an instant. Instead, he forced a trial, forced transparency, forced the Senate and the Order to look directly at the rot in their own ranks. The system bent, but it did not collapse. That is the quiet lesson underneath the duels and the starships. The fate of the Republic did not hinge only on one corrupt chancellor or one fallen knight. It hinged on a pattern of decisions, a council that had grown comfortable with secrecy, a Senate that had surrendered power in the name of safety, a war machine that made obedience easier than doubt. Institutions mattered, but in the end, the chosen one did not rewrite those institutions with a single swing. He simply refused to make them worse. On a smaller scale, that same pattern repeats in halls far from Coruscant. Anakin chooses to reveal his marriage instead of hiding it. Padme chooses to stay in the chamber and answer hard questions instead of shielding her reputation. Bail and Mon Mothma choose open commissions and public inquiries over backroom purges. Each time, the temptation is the same. Protect the image, protect the Order, protect the self. Each time, the better path is transparency over secrecy, shared responsibility over the fantasy that one savior alone can fix everything. Sparing Palpatine made that path harder. His silence in the Mandalorian vault did not erase his influence. It stretched it across decades, into Luke's doubts and the cracks of a reformed but still fragile republic. The galaxy paid for that mercy with new crises, with a Skywalker nearly lost, with a final storm of Sith lightning over the galaxy gun. Yet that same mercy preserved something the canon timeline had to rebuild from ashes. A living Jedi Order, a functioning Senate, a generation that did not grow up under an empire's boot. Both timelines become cautionary tales. One shows how quickly freedom dies when fear and obedience fuse into an empire. The other shows how exhausting it is to hold on to justice even after the crisis is averted. How reform demands constant vigilance long after the last battle is won. In one, Luke inherits wreckage. In the other, he inherits weight. Anakin never gets to erase his near fall. Luke never gets to erase his possession. No Skywalker in any timeline rewrites the past. But there is always the next decision, the next confession, the next refusal to reach for easy power. In that single second, the future can still branch and the galaxy can still move one step closer to the light. Before you jump to hyperspace, like, comment, and choose the next what if. In this moment, that truth hangs over Coruscant like a silent starship. The fate of families, of orders, of the galaxy keeps bending around single decisions, single confessions, single refusals to reach for easy power. So now the story turns outward. Somewhere, a mind is already reaching back through the saga, tracing another crack in the timeline, another instant where everything could have broken differently. Perhaps it is the duel of the fates on Naboo, Maul's blade flashing toward a different target. Perhaps it is Luke's hand hovering over Vader on the second Death Star, or Rey standing before a dying Emperor. All he had to do All any of them ever had to do was make one different choice. Down in the comments below this tale, that is where those moments gather. One scene, one fracture in destiny, one sentence to pitch an entire alternate age of the Jedi and the Sith, a pod race that ends another way, a council vote that does not go as it once did, a single order that never reaches the clone's ears. From that sentence, a new branch of the story can grow. If this journey through decades of Skywalker history stirred something, if watching Anakin stand firm and Luke fall and rise again made the galaxy feel larger and more fragile at the same time, then that signal matters. Every shared moment of attention tells the storytellers that deep, timeline-spanning visions of Jedi and Sith, of Republic and Empire, still have power. Because this is only one path through an endless storm of possibilities. In another strand, Maul's blade finds Obi-Wan on Naboo, and the Chosen One is never trained by the man who understood him best. In another, Luke never leaves Tatooine, his eyes forever on twin suns instead of stars at war. Each of those is an entire era waiting to be charted. Another entry in an alternate galaxy where the same hearts face different shadows. Across the galaxy, debates have already begun. In council rooms and living rooms, in watch parties and late-night arguments, friends still return to a single question. Did Anakin ever truly have a choice? This story becomes fuel for that fire, another vision to place beside the canon, another angle from which to watch his blade, his eyes, his hesitation. Shared with one more voice in that circle, it becomes a new spark in the next debate, the next rewatch, the next long night under familiar stars. The camera pulls back now, past a reformed Jedi council chamber, where Anakin stands not as a weapon, but as a guardian, past the sealed vault that holds a broken Sith Lord, lightning long since faded from his fingers, but not from his memory. Past the quiet glow of a Naboo balcony, where the Skywalker family looks up, together, into a sky that once promised only war. Farther still, until Coruscant becomes a single point of light among billions. In that vastness, one truth remains. He made a choice, and so will the next hero, the next villain, the next lost child of the Force. Somewhere out there, another decision is about to be made. Another timeline is about to fracture, and another story is about to begin. The screen fades, but the question does not. Which moment breaks next?